the sovereign realm. On the enormous mountain that was covered in lava and emanated a fiery glow that shot into the sky, Ting sat cross-legged like a god of flames, and he had a dignified and supreme bearing. It was only an ant, yet you lost 2 half-step immortal kings and a Tao attendant disciple of the sect. Wei Xing, you've really disappointed me. Ting spoke with a flat tone, and it didn't contain any emotions. Wei Xing, that was called Mr. Wei Bai's Wuxia Feng, stood before the volcano, and his heart shook while sweat effused out from his forehead. He hurriedly bowed and said, Ancestor Swerin, since Chun Shi descended to the mortal dimension, his strength would definitely not exceed the golden immortal realm. The reason the plan failed this time might have been because Chun Shi had the assistance of an expert. Otherwise, with the ability of those half-step immortal kings from the Zhuoqiu clan, they would definitely not die at his hands. The assistance of an expert? Ting's eyes suddenly opened wide, and cold bolts of lightning shot out from within his eyes as he said indifferently, Is this the explanation you're giving me? Disciple admits his mistakes. Ancestor, please hand down your punishment. Wei Xing knelt onto the ground with a thump, and he felt even more terrified in his heart, while he remained silent like a cicada in the winter. He didn't dare try to defend himself again. He was only a Tao attendant disciple, so if Ting was displeased with him, then Ting could casually annihilate him without giving him any room to explain himself. Actually, he felt rather wronged in his heart as well. Because who would have expected that even 2 half-step immortal kings would suffer misfortune in the mortal dimension? This wasn't the fault of a flaw in his plan, and only that little bastard, Chun Shi, could be blamed for being too abnormal. That little bastard possesses the Tao Calamity Sword and River Diagram fragments, and he's also greatly relatedly to Oracle Mountain. He really isn't so easy to deal with. Ting went silent for a short moment before he spoke indifferently. However, before he could speak any further, a grand voice suddenly resounded through this expanse of the heavens and the earth. Senior brother Swerin, quickly head to Jade Spirit Palace. The sect master wants to meet you. Thank you for notifying me, junior brother. Ting swiftly stood up and cupped his hands towards the space in the distance. And then he said to Wei Xing, You wait here for now. I'll be back soon. Wei Xing hurriedly bowed, and he only heaved a sigh of relief after Ting's figure vanished. He thought in his heart, why would the sect master have summoned him? I'm not allowed to step foot into the 3 dimensions within the next 100 years. After the time for an incense stick to burn, Ting returned. However, his brows were knit together tightly, and there was clearly something weighing down on his mind. Earlier, when he arrived at Jade Spirit Palace, he didn't meet the sect master of the sovereign sect, yet he received a voice transmission from the sect master. The sect master instructed him that he wasn't allowed to step foot into the 3 dimensions again for the next 100 years. Even though the reason behind this wasn't pointed out in a clear manner, Ting was still roughly able to guess the reason. It was definitely related to the upheaval of the 3 dimensions, otherwise the sect master would absolutely not instruct him personally. Looks like a great calamity is descending within 100 years of time. After a short moment, Ting took a deep breath and confirmed a thought of his. Wei Xing, said Ting. Yes. Wei Xing had been waiting here since before, and he hurriedly bowed to Ting. Originally, I intended to act myself. However, I have other things, important matters to attend to now. Since it's like that, I'll give you another chance. You must kill Chun Shi within 100 years of time. For the sake of making it easier for you to accomplish this, you can take control of and use all the pawns of the sect within the immortal dimension. Ting pondered deeply before he spoke slowly. I only have a single request. Bring back the Tao Calamity Sword and River Diagram fragments. Wei Xing's spirits were refreshed when he heard this. Disciple will definitely not let Ancestor down. Swoosh! Ting tossed a command token over to Wei Xing, and then his expression became stern as he said coldly, Remember, if you're unable to complete this assignment within 100 years of time, then don't blame me for being merciless. The Immortal Dimension, Tao Emperor Academy. Within a secret realm, the gray-clothed and white-haired Hua Jiankong sat cross-legged there. The myriad starnet disk floated in midair behind him, and it revealed a myriad of strands of chilly starlight. OM! Suddenly, a wave of strange fluctuations arose, and then a bright light flashed within the myriad starnet disk before a passageway surged into appearance. Hua Jiankong, who was meditating with his eyes closed, was suddenly jolted awake, and then he stood up and looked over. Sure enough, he saw Xianxia's figure walk out from within the passageway. "You've returned," said Hua Jiankong with a smile on his face. "Senior." Xianxia cupped his hands. He heaved a sigh of relief for no rhyme or reason within his heart upon returning to the immortal dimension that was familiar to him, and he was able to clearly sense that his sealed strength had recovered completely. This sort of feeling of possessing strength once more caused him to feel very steady in his heart. "Have you finished what you intended to do?" asked Hua Jinkong. Xianxia nodded. The matters of the mortal dimension had indeed come to an end, and the only regret he had was being unable to head to the Bai clan to meet Bai Wanqing and the others. "The Dean asked me to tell you that once you've fully grasped the Tao Emperor's inheritance, he'll personally meet you. Now that you've returned to the immortal dimension, then calm yourself and cultivate within the academy." For an unknown reason, Hua Jiankong gave Xianxia such a suggestion. "Yes, Junior understands." Xianxia nodded once more. Actually, since he found out that Ji was the primeval Tao Emperor, Xianxia was already clearly aware that the Dean knew of his identity a long time ago. As for whether Hua Jiankong knew of his identity, he didn't know. However, Xianxia couldn't be bothered about all of this at this moment. Perhaps he would be able to find out about everything from the Dean after he completely grasped the Tao Emperor's inheritance. After that, Hua Jiankong didn't speak any further, and he led Xianxia out of the secret realm and sent Xianxia all the way to the sword room before he left. After he returned to his own abode and sat down cross-legged within it, Xianxia didn't rest for a moment before he checked on the 9-continent divine cauldrons, and he instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he noticed that nothing unusual had occurred within it. Because this was the immortal dimension, and the 9-continent divine cauldrons didn't just contain the minor world, ancient hall. Now even all the higher-ups and disciples of the 9 Radiant Sword sect were within it. So once it was noticed by the energy of the heaven Tao in the immortal dimension, he would absolutely have boundless troubles. There probably won't be any mishaps with the tiny cauldron and my clone taking care of them within the 9-continent divine cauldrons. Xianxia pondered silently in his mind. The 9-continent divine cauldrons were divine treasures that held down the karmic luck of the world at the absolute beginning of the world, and it was divided into 9 divine cauldrons. Every single cauldron had a world within it, and it was extremely miraculous. His clone had always been cultivating the Nethergod 9 cauldron form technique within the cauldrons, and it was improving with amazing speed. Presently, his clone had already cultivated this technique until the 3rd level, and his clone's body had been tempered to the golden immortal realm. In the immortal dimension, his clone's strength was sufficient to crush any golden immortal. However, this sort of cultivation speed was still inferior to the cultivation realm of his main body. Xianxia didn't have any extravagant hopes that his clone would be able to help him greatly. From the beginning until the end, he'd taken his clone to be a method of escape for him. If his main body suffered a mishap, then his clone would be of use. Now, because Ancient Hall and the entire 9 Radiant Sword sect had been placed within the cauldrons, his clone could speak with his friends and family within the cauldrons while his clone cultivated, so it could be considered to be a very pleasing matter. For example, Xianxia's clone was talking with his younger brother, Qian Hao, within Pine Mist City at this moment. The Tao Emperor's inheritance. After a short while, Xianxia moved his thoughts to the jade brand within his sea of consciousness, the Tao Emperor's inheritance. Unfortunately, it was enveloped by the energy of the river diagram fragments, so he was unable to comprehend the contents of the jade slip no matter how he tried. Forget it. I'll obtain this inheritance sooner or later. Now, I should calm myself and cultivate, and strive to completely fuse the enduring divine crest. At that time, it would be enough for me to establish my own talisman Saint Tao. Xianxia pondered deeply for a long time before he decided. His experiences in the mortal dimension allowed him to have a deeper feeling that it wouldn't be too long before the upheaval of the 3 dimensions would probably erupt completely. Most importantly, the appearance of Zhuoqiu Hong, Zhuoqiu Boyun, and Bing Shirtian caused Chen Shi to sense a trace of an extremely dangerous aura. He deeply understood that the Zhuoqiu clan and sovereign sect had clearly been targeting him for a long time, and it was even to the extent that these two powers might be planning an operation to deal with him. Under such circumstances, Chen Shi didn't dare slack off at all. Of course, he was very clearly aware that if he really entered into a full-scale battle with the Zhuoqiu clan now, then he didn't have to worry about failing. Because he'd planned numerous things in these past few years, so if he were to declare war with the Zhuoqiu clan, then there would absolutely be numerous extraordinary figures that came to assist him. For example, Shi Yu and Shangliu Li, Dao Yao, Pang Du, and Sun Wuhan from Nuwas Dao Palace, and the Midnight Immortal King from Midnight Continent. Even though they were currently at the Immortal King realm, but don't forget that they'd each obtained a Dao fruit spirit. Moreover, if nothing unexpected occurred, then they would be able to step into the God rank realm within 100 years of time. It wasn't just that. Even Dao Emperor Academy's Qi Zongxing, Hua Jiankong, Zhao Taisai, and Ao Jiahui had each obtained a Dao fruit spirit from Chen Shi. If they found out that Chen Shi had entered into war with the Zhuoqiu clan, then they would definitely not stand by idly. Besides that, forces like the members of the Star Alliance and the Shenyuan clan that stood behind Axiu would become powerful supporters of Chen Shi. It could be said that Chen Shi had long since created a network of relationships and powers of his own in Dao Emperor Academy, and once it erupted, it would absolutely shake the entire immortal dimension. The only thing that Chen Shi wasn't satisfied with was his own cultivation. It was only at the Saint Immortal realm, and it was precisely because of this that he still hadn't declared war with the Zhuoqiu clan until now. So to Chen Shi right now, the important matter at hand was to cultivate and improve his cultivation with all his might. It wasn't just for the sake of taking revenge on the Zhuoqiu clan. He still had to go against the sovereign sect and the impending upheaval of the three dimensions. When he figured all of this out clearly, Chen Shi didn't have the mood to think about anything else, and he immediately entered into closed-door cultivation within the world of stars. Flowers bloomed and withered while spring passed, and autumn arrived. 3 years had passed since Chen Shi entered into closed-door cultivation, and an entire 15 years had passed in the world of stars. To the residents of the immortal dimension, these 3 years of time passed in merely the blink of an eye, and it was nothing. After all, some seniors could enter into closed-door cultivation for over 10,000 years at a time. Time was extremely long to all the cultivators within the immortal dimension, yet it was also extremely pressing. Because every single time they cultivated, it would consume too much of their time. On this day, Axiu suddenly paid a visit to Chen Shi, and she jolted Chen Shi awake from his cultivation. She invited me to attend Senior Shenyuan Pashiao's birthday? Chen Shi couldn't help but be stunned when he found out the reason for Axiu's arrival. He didn't know who Shenyuan Pashiao was, but he felt that it was only a birthday, so he wondered why he would be invited. Shenyuan Pashiao, a rather legendary senior in one of the 7 great ancient clans, the Shenyuan clan. He'd experienced countless bloody battles throughout his life, and he was an unyielding and resolute figure that shook the entire immortal dimension. His most renowned battle occurred 8,000 years ago in the Outerium battlefield. Shenyuan Pashiao alone furiously slaughtered 12 Xeno-race Grand Commanders that were equivalent to the half-step Immortal King realm and obtained the nickname Iron-Blooded King. His might shook the entire world, and countless living beings took pleasure in talking about it. However, after that battle, Shenyuan Pashiao went into closed-door cultivation in seclusion, and 8,000 years had passed since then. Axiu had come looking for Chen Shi today in order to invite him to attend Shenyuan Pashiao's birthday, because this birthday was unlike his birthdays of the past. It indicated that Shenyuan Pashiao had once again emerged into the world after his closed-door cultivation for 8,000 years. Such a great figure that possessed the nickname of Iron-Blooded King held a birthday ceremony as soon as he left his closed-door cultivation. So it drew the attention of countless people in the immortal dimension. Dark Combat City, the territory of the Shenyuan clan. Since the information about Shenyuan Pashiao's birthday ceremony being held in Dark Combat City spread throughout the immortal dimension, the figures of numerous top powers in the immortal dimension had appeared within Dark Combat City, and today was the day of Shenyuan Pashiao's birthday ceremony. Within an extremely grand hall, it was filled with a crowd of guests. and the top great figures from all over the immortal dimension were waiting here since long ago. Row after row of beautiful maidservants poured tea while polite and respectful attendants moved about around the hall, and they provided hospitable services for all the guests. Because there were too many guests this time to the point it greatly exceeded the expectations of the Xianxia clan, and coupled with the venue of the birthday ceremony being Darkombat City instead of the Xianxia clan's headquarters, it caused the disciples of the Xianxia clan that welcomed the guests this time to be slightly insufficient. Under such circumstances, Qi Xiaoyu that lived within the Xianxia clan took up the role of welcoming guests. She was the foster daughter that Lu Jianheng had taken in, and after she was brought back to Darkombat City by Chen Shi had arranged for her and Lu Jianheng to stay within the Xianxia clan. So she passed her days in a rather substantial and calm manner. However, Qi Xiaoyu had grown up within the mining area since she was young. So even though she'd lived in the Xianxia clan for many years, she had never welcomed guests in her life. Coupled with the fact that all who entered the hall were great figures from all over the immortal dimension, she couldn't help but be slightly nervous. It was even to the extent that she wasn't clearly aware of exactly what role she was supposed to play. So she had no choice but to do anything that she noticed had to be done. She didn't just welcome guests, and she even did her best to help with other things like pouring tea and serving guests that maidservants and attendants had to take care of. Qi Xiaoyu didn't feel aggrieved because she and Lu Jianheng had been living within the Xianxia clan for the past few years, and they received a great deal of care and protection from the Xianxia clan. This caused her to be rather grateful, yet she'd never been able to find an opportunity to repay this. At this moment, she had the fortune to welcome guests with some disciples of the Xianxia clan, so she was extremely happy in her heart. However, it was the first time she was doing things like this after all. For a time, she couldn't help but be slightly flustered, and there were quite a few times where she almost shattered the teapots and wine cups. A beautiful maidservant noticed Qi Xiaoyu almost overturn a wine cup while serving a guest, and she hurriedly came forward and said to Qi Xiaoyu, "Young Miss Qi, allow me. I'm fine. Feel free to tend to your own tasks." Qi Xiaoyu stuck out her tongue and spoke with slight embarrassment, and then she turned around with the intention of pouring tea for another guest that had just entered the hall. However, she collided with a guest as soon as she turned around, causing the hot tea that she just filled to the brim to pour down. And if that guest didn't dodge in time, then it would have almost poured on his body. "Lowly servant, don't you know how to look before you walk?" The guest was a young man in a luxurious robe, and he instantly became display and berated coldly when he saw a maidservant clumsily collide with him. This young man was called Wuxia Ting, and he was a disciple of the Wuxia clan. At the same time, he was an inner court student of Dao Emperor Academy. The relationship between the Wuxia clan and Xianxia clan wasn't really good. However, they were both amongst the 7 great ancient clans after all. This time, since Xianxia Pixiao was holding a birthday ceremony, the Wuxia clan still had to send someone to congratulate Xianxia Pixiao. Wuxia Ting was representing the Wuxia clan by attending the birthday ceremony, and the reason he alone was sent over was because of the severe internal conflict within the Wuxia clan. There was no end to the chaos within the clan, and all the great figures of the clan were in conflict and go against each other. So they didn't have any mood to attend Xianxia Pixiao's birthday ceremony. Thus, Wuxia Ting was sent over to make up for this. Wuxia Ting was clearly aware of the bad relationship between the Wuxia clan and the Xianxia clan, so he was rather unwilling when he came to attend the birthday ceremony this time. Now, when he saw a maidservant actually collided with him and almost caused him to embarrass himself, how could his mood be good? "Young master, I'm sorry. Please calm your anger." Qi Xiaoyu hurriedly apologized in a low voice. "Fuck off." Wuxia Ting frowned as he spat out 2 words, and his face was covered in displeasure. No matter how good Qi Xiaoyu's temper was, her pretty face couldn't help but turn pale from anger after being called a lowly servant and bluntly asked to fuck off. However, she didn't dare say anything in the end because today was Xianxia Pixiao's birthday ceremony, and she didn't want the happy atmosphere to be destroyed because of her. Coupled with the fact that Wuxia Ting's identity was definitely extremely distinguished because he was able to attend the birthday ceremony. So how could Qi Xiaoyu dare make a fuss about it with him? "Young master, Young Miss Qi isn't a servant of our Shenyuan clan, so please watch your words. An attendant at the side couldn't bear to continue watching, and he couldn't help but remind Zhuoting. Zhuoting's face sank. Never had he imagined that an attendant would dare to talk back to him as well, and he couldn't help but smile coldly at Qi Xiaoyu. You're a clansman of the Shenyuan clan? Qi Xiaoyu puckered her lips and shook his head. Then you're a honored guest invited by the Shenyuan clan? Zhuoting continued. Qi Xiaoyu shook her head once more. A wisp of rage couldn't help but arise in Zhuoting's heart when he saw this. Since it's like this, then could it be that this young master was wrong to ask you to fuck off? Young master, you've misunderstood. The attendant at the side intended to explain about Qi Xiaoyu's identity upon hearing this. However, before he could finish speaking, he was berated by Zhuoting. You fuck off as well. This young master came to attend the birthday ceremony, and not to waste my breath on lowly trash like the two of you. Who are you calling lowly trash? Even though Qi Xiaoyu was exercising forbearance, she would absolutely not allow anyone to degrade her. So, when she heard Zhuoting humiliating her over and over again, then if she still didn't make a stand against him, then she would lose all honor. Zhuoting was stunned for a moment, yet when he noticed the guests in the surroundings were looking at him, he instantly felt as if he was monkey that was watched by a crowd. When had he, Zhuoting, suffered such a humiliation? They are servants of the Shenyuan clan, yet they actually dared to bully me? If I let them go like this, then my Zhuoqiu clan would utterly lose face. When he thought up to here, he swung his palm fiercely at Qi Xiaoyu while cursing angrily. Bitch! You're lawless! The nearby guests hadn't expected that Zhuoting would react so drastically and actually disregard his elegant demeanor to slap a young woman in front of so many people. On the other hand, Qi Xiaoyu dodged instinctively, yet how could she possibly dodge when Zhuoting had swung a slap at her so suddenly? His palm grew closer and closer to her, and she was even able to feel the airflow that came from the swing of his palm, causing her to feel piercing pain coming from her skin. Right at this moment, a hand suddenly stretched out from the side and firmly grabbed onto Zhuoting's wrist, and that slap that was filled with rage was forcefully stopped just like this. It was only an inch away from Qi Xiaoyu's face. Who is it? Zhuoting let out a muffled grunt while his wrist was almost twisted apart. His expression immediately changed before he turned around to look over fiercely, yet he instantly cried out involuntarily when he saw the appearance of this person clearly. Xianxia? This person wore green clothes and had a handsome appearance. It was exactly Xianxia. He originally didn't intend to attend this birthday ceremony, yet he was unable to overcome Axios pestering, and coupled with the fact that this birthday ceremony was being held in Darkombat City, he agreed to it in the end. However, never had he expected that as soon as he arrived here, he would see his master, Lu Jianheng's foster daughter, Qi Xiaoyu, actually suffer such humiliation, and his face instantly became icy cold. Xianxia! Zhuoting's involuntary exclaim of shock drew the gazes of many people in the vicinity as well. Couldn't be helped. This name was simply like the scorching sun in the midday sky within the immortal dimension now, and it was known to all. So how could all the numerous great figures present here be unaware of this name? When they found out that this handsome young man before them was Xianxia, it naturally drew the attention of numerous gazes. Zhuoting knew that he'd lost his composure slightly earlier, and he steadied his mind and heart before he said coldly to Xianxia, Xianxia, what's the meaning of this? His wrist was still being held by Xianxia, and his bones hurt, yet no matter how he struggled, it was utterly in vain. This caused him to be both shocked and furious in his heart. What's the meaning of this? Xianxia patted Qi Xiaoyu on the shoulder. She's my little sister. Since my little sister was bullied, then I, her older brother, naturally have to help her seek justice. His younger sister. Zhuoting's face turned grim. No matter how he racked his brains, he would have never imagined that this young woman before him that poured tea for the guests earlier would actually be Xianxia's little sister. It wasn't just him, all the guests in the vicinity felt that it was slightly difficult to believe. When did Xianxia actually get a little sister? Only Qi Xiaoyu, who stood at the side, felt moved and nervous in her heart. and she said softly, "Big brother Xianxia, today is Senior Shenuan Pashiao's birthday. Don't make a fuss about it with him. All right, I'll listen to you." Xianxia nodded, yet he suddenly said, "However, even though he can avoid death, he can't escape punishment. Since he dared to attack you, then I'll cripple this hand of his as punishment." As soon as he finished speaking, a crack resounded. Zhuo Ting's right wrist was directly twisted, and the bones within it shattered inch by inch. Hiss! Zhuo Ting gasped in pain, and he was just about to exclaim in pain when he heard Xianxia's indifferent voice. "If you dare make a sound, then I'll kill you right now. You can try if you don't believe me." His voice was calm, yet it carried an unquestionable tone. Zhuo Ting instantly forcefully restrained himself while his face had become livid and ferocious, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Very good. Let me see for how long you, Xianxia, can continue living." As soon as he finished speaking, he glanced at Xianxia with extreme resentment, and then he turned around and left. After being humiliated to such an extent, he naturally couldn't bear to stay here any longer. Coupled with the fact that he was extremely worried that Xianxia would truly disregard everything and kill him, so he didn't dare stay here for a moment longer. After all, even the heir of the Zhuo clan, Zhuo Kong, had died at Xianxia's hand. He was too much inferior to Zhuo Kong, so he naturally didn't dare challenge Xianxia. On the other hand, all the people in the surroundings were extremely shocked in their hearts when they saw this scene. He actually dared to do that during Shenuan Pashiao's birthday ceremony. This Xianxia really is brave. "Xianxia, what happened?" Meanwhile, Axiu came over from afar when she heard about what was happening here. Xianxia shook his head and said with a smile, "It's nothing." Crippling Zhuo Ting's right arm was indeed nothing to Xianxia now, because even if he killed Zhuo Ting, he wouldn't be mentally burdened by it at all. But obviously, such an answer wasn't able to satisfy Axiu. Thus, she directly pulled over an attendant from the side and asked about the sequence of events. How could that attendant not recognize this little princess of the Shenuan clan? He immediately and respectfully spoke about everything that occurred earlier. "All of you actually allowed little you to serve the guests?" When she found out about all of this, Axiu instantly glared at the attendants and said angrily, "Who arranged this?" She seemed as if she was about to denounce the crimes of someone. The attendant's heart jerked, and he was terrified to the point of being unable to speak. Earlier, Xianxia was also wondering why Xiaoyu had been reduced to someone that was like a servant when he'd arranged for her to live in the Shenuan clan. And if this was true, Xianxia would feel even more uncomfortable in his heart. Xiaoyu explained softly from the side instead. "It's not their fault. The clan was short of hands at welcoming guests. So I came to help because I was free and had nothing to do. But I didn't know what I should do. So, this happened." Xianxia instantly came to a sudden understanding, and then he stretched out his hand to pat Xiaoyu on the shoulder. He didn't know whether he should laugh or cry as he sighed. "Little girl, aren't you a bit too kind-hearted? Don't do this again in the future." Xiaoyu hurriedly nodded. But even then, Xianxia still decided in his heart that he would take Xiaoyu and Lu Jianheng with him after the birthday party ended, and he would arrange a place for them within the 9-continent divine cauldrons. In this way, they could meet with the members of the 9 Radiant Sword sect, and they wouldn't have to live under someone else's roof any longer. That Zhuo Ting is really brave. He actually dared to cause trouble in my Shenuan clan's territory. I'll deal with him later. Axiu was still angry because she'd invited Xianxia to attend the birthday party this time, yet such an incident had occurred in the territory of her own clan, so how could she not be angry? "All right, this is Senior Shenuan Pashiao's birthday ceremony. Don't allow such trivial matters to affect your mood." Xianxia couldn't help but smile and took the initiative to console Axiu. Axiu grunted a few times before she dropped the matter. This small disturbance passed in the blink of an eye. Xianxia led Xiaoyu and Axiu along to sit down at a corner of the hall, and they drank wine and sipped tea leisurely. However, Xianxia was still able to notice that many gazes within the hall were faintly sizing him up, and these gazes didn't carry much ill intent and were mostly filled with curiosity. Xianxia had long since become unperturbed towards all of this. Even if he was unwilling, he had no choice but to admit that there was probably no one in the immortal dimension that didn't recognize him. This was his reputation. Especially when Xianxia killed Zuoqiukong all those years ago and completely shed all pretenses with one of the 7 great ancient clans, the Zuoqiu clan. At that time, his reputation in the immortal dimension had already arrived at a state of being comparable to the scorching sun in the midday sky, and it was to the point that everyone knew him. When they saw him make an appearance during Shenyuan Pashiao's birthday ceremony, it naturally drew the attention of the great figures from all over. Especially because he'd even broken Zuoqiuting's wrist earlier. Even though he was helping Qi Xiaoyu avenge the humiliation she received, it was slightly thought-provoking when it entered into the eyes of others. Or perhaps, most people felt that it was precisely because of the hostile relationship between Xianxia and the Zuoqiu clan that Xianxia would seize the opportunity to terribly humiliate Zuoqiuting. Of course, Xianxia wouldn't admit this. The auspicious moment has arrived. Before long, a clear and resounding voice resounded within the hall. Along with this voice, a group of people emerged one after the other from the side of the hall, and they drew the attention of all the people present in the hall. The person in the lead of that group was a thin and tall middle-aged man. His brows were dense and shaped like blades while his gaze seemed like bolts of lightning, and he wore a simple black robe. Every single move he made emanated an oppressive aura of unyieldingness and resolution that terrifying the soul. Shockingly, he was the senior of the Shenyuan clan that possessed the nickname Iron-Blooded King, Shenyuan Pashiao. When they saw him make an appearance, the expressions of all the guests turned solemn while they carefully sized him up. On the surface, these guests had come here this time for the sake of congratulating Shenyuan Pashiao on his birthday. Yet they'd truly come for the sake of finding out the reason behind Shenyuan Pashiao dragging in lots of people to hold a birthday ceremony after being in closed-door cultivation for 8,000 years. Sure enough, this old fellow has already advanced into the Immortal King realm. In the crowd, a short yellow-robed middle-aged man's eyes narrowed, while he couldn't help but sigh with surprise in his heart. An Immortal King has finally appeared amongst the 3 brothers, Shenyuan Pashiao, Shenyuan Patian, and Shenyuan Pujuan. If news of this was to spread, it would shock the entire immortal dimension. This yellow-robed middle-aged man was called Zhongli Chan, and he was an elder from one of the 7 great ancient clans, the Zhongli clan. He'd come here today for the sake of congratulating Shenyuan Pashiao. It wasn't just Zhongli Chan. Many great figures in the surroundings had determined from the bearing Shenyuan Pashiao revealed that Shenyuan Pashiao had attained the Immortal King realm after cultivating behind closed doors for 8,000 years. For a time, the gazes they shot at Shenyuan Pashiao had changed. Xianxia similarly noticed this as well. Even though he was only at the Saint Immortal realm now, he'd come into contact with supreme existences at the Immortal King realm on more than one occasion. So he was extremely sensitive towards the might and supreme aura of an Immortal King and was naturally capable of determining this with a single glance. If it was any other Saint Immortal in his place, then the Saint Immortal would probably be unable to discern all of this. At the bottom of it all, it was still related to the saying, the difference in one's horizons causes one's ability to vary. Xianxia's current horizons had long since arrived at the God-rank realm. So being able to distinguish that Shenyuan Pashiao had advanced into the Immortal King realm was within reason. No wonder the birthday ceremony this time is so grand. It turns out that Shenyuan Pashiao has advanced into the Immortal King realm. Xianxia seemed to be lost in thought, and he faintly understood the objective behind the Shenyuan clan holding this birthday ceremony. The Shenyuan clan intended to silently reveal its resources and reserves in order to deter the other powers of the immortal dimension. Of course, this was merely Xianxia's guess. Ha ha ha! After not making an appearance for 8,000 years, I never expected that I would be able to receive the congratulations of so many fellow Taoists. I thank all of you. Meanwhile, Shenyuan Pashiao stood at the center of the hall and roared with laughter, and his voice was grand and rather frank. The other guests hurriedly cupped their hands when they heard this, and then they came forward to congratulate Shenyuan Pashiao. Since they were congratulating him, they naturally had to give him a birthday present. Moreover, these sort of birthday presents would be announced by the master of ceremony. It wasn't for the sake of showing off, and it was merely for the sake of adding a happy atmosphere to the event. Just like this very moment, a pile of presents had already been piled up at the side of the hall, and they were mostly placed within all sorts of exquisite jade boxes. A middle-aged man that seemed like the master of ceremonies stood at the side, and he announced the name and source of all the presents. The ancient Ji clan, a pair of auspicious dragon jade pendants. The ancient Jiang clan, a bottle of clear light myriad profundity power. The ancient Mu clan, a 9 dawn bell. As the master of ceremony announced present after present, it definitely caused a wave of heated discussion and envious gazes because every single one of those treasures were rare precious treasures that were priceless. It was utterly impossible for powers without great resources and reserves to produce such treasures. For example, the auspicious dragon jade pendants from the Ji clan. It was a rare auspicious precious treasure, and when worn on the body, it gathered the karmic luck of the heavens and the earth, causing auspicious chi to descend onto the body. It was extremely profound and miraculous. These were the resources and reserves of an ancient clan. Of course, it was also because the birthday ceremony this time was being held for a senior like Shenyuan Pixiao, who possessed the nickname Iron-Blooded King. If it was any other ordinary figure, then it would be utterly impossible for the Ji clan to give away such a precious treasure as a present. These ancient clans really do possess extremely deep resources and reserves. Xianxia was extremely astounded as he listened from the side. He didn't recognize many of the presents, but those treasures undoubtedly possessed extremely shocking values. May I ask young brother Xianxia, what present have you given this time? Can you allow our horizons to be broadened? Suddenly, a voice resounded from the side. Xianxia raised his eyes to look over and saw a middle-aged man that was wearing a feather crown and dark clothes grinning at him. It wasn't just the middle-aged man in dark clothes. Many guests in the vicinity were sizing him up with curiosity. They seemed to intend to witness what sort of present this junior, Xianxia, prepared. Why was Xianxia a junior? It was very simple. Because practically all the people capable of being present in this hall were great figures of the top powers in the immortal dimension, and there were only a few people of the younger generation like Xianxia amongst them. Xianxia didn't recognize this middle-aged man, yet he still smiled as he said, "I'm sorry, I've already presented my present. If you want to know, then perhaps the master of ceremony will announce it." He was telling the truth. When he arrived here with Axiu, he'd given the jade box with his present to Axiu, and then Axiu handed it over to the clansmen of the Shenyuan clan. However, his answer caused many guests to be surprised, and it was even to the extent that they doubted him. The reason was extremely simple. The present that could be announced had definitely been carefully selected before they were brought forward. If a present that was too ordinary was still announced, then it would be no different than slapping someone on the face and would cause a great deal of displeasure. The guests by Xianxia's side were said to be great figures of the various top powers in the immortal dimension, yet most of the presents they gave didn't have any chance of being announced. This wasn't because the presents they gave weren't precious, and it was because their presents instantly seem ordinary when compared with those ancient clans. So, if their presents were announced in public, then they themselves would feel humiliated as well. So when they heard Xianxia say that the master of ceremony would actually announce his present, the reactions of these guests would be so shocked and even slightly doubtful. "Oh? So, young brother Xianxia paid a great price for the present you gave this time." The dark-clothed middle-aged man smiled as he spoke, and his voice carried a trace of faint ridicule. He seemed as if he was saying, "Young man, was there any need to try so hard in order to seek the limelight? Young brother Xianxia, even though we don't know each other, I have to remind you that one's intentions are the most important. Don't act on impulse and get tricked." Another guest spoke as if he was guiding a junior. Xianxia was stunned, and he couldn't help but rub his nose. "It's only a present. Is there any need to exaggerate so much?" When they saw Xianxia's speechless appearance, all the guests in the vicinity didn't stop speaking, and they instead started to educate Xianxia in an even more enthusiastic manner. They seemed as if they'd taken Xianxia to be a junior and were teaching him. If it was other person here, then these great figures would naturally not be so fervent. The key was that Xianxia was truly too renowned now, and he was an illustrious star of the immortal dimension's younger generation. Now that they had an opportunity to point out an inadequacy in Xianxia, how could they miss this opportunity? At the bottom of it all, it was none other than for the sake of feeling a sense of existence, and they couldn't be said to have much ill intent. Exactly. Even if your present can be announced, it's only a moment of fame. Moreover, do you dare guarantee that your present can surpass all the others? Doesn't this really not seem worth it? It isn't just not worth it. Doing this will instead cause many guests to be unhappy. A junior like you trying to fight for the limelight with those old fellows would probably cause others to laugh at you for not knowing your limits. All the guests spoke one after the other and guided Xianxia, and they seemed like seniors that were looking after a junior, causing Xianxia to be at a loss for whether to laugh or cry. It's only a present. Is there any need for all of this? Xianxia, don't pay attention to these old fellows. They're obviously envious that your present can be announced. At the bottom of it all, it's because of the mindset of calling a grape sour because one didn't have the opportunity to taste it. Axiu laughed lightly without end from the side, and she seemed as if she was watching the show. Xianxia rubbed his brows and was very helpless. He was naturally clearly aware of these old fellows' thoughts, and if he were to argue about it with them, it would definitely cause him to be criticized, so he could only keep quiet. Fortunately, these great figures that were flaunting their seniority didn't have any ill intent. Otherwise she couldn't be bothered to listen to their nonsense. As if he'd noticed Xianxia's indifferent attitude, a guest instantly revealed an exasperated expression and was just about to educate Xianxia once more. Yet right at this moment, a sentence from the master of ceremony in the hall drew his attention over. This final treasure is from the #1 student in Dao Emperor Academy's inner court, Xianxia. This treasure can be said to be rare in the 3 dimensions and difficult to obtain since the ancient times. Its value is simply priceless. The master of ceremony in the distance held a jade box with both hands, and he had an excited expression while his voice resounded like a bell. He didn't hold back his words of praise, and it instantly drew the attention of the entire hall. Everyone was shocked and felt slight disbelief, because this was the final present, so logically speaking, it would be the most precious and rare amongst all the presents. Yet no matter how extraordinary Xianxia was, how could the present he prepared possibly compare with those ancient powers? Rare in the 3 dimensions? Difficult to obtain since the ancient times? Priceless? Is that even possible? However, because this was the words of the Shenyuan clan's master of ceremony, even though they doubted it in their hearts, not a single person spoke out to question this before they'd confirmed whether it was true or not. For a time, everyone shot their gazes towards the jade box in the master of ceremony's hands, and they intended to see exactly what sort of treasure was contained within it. However, to the disappointment of all, the master of ceremony spoke apologetically in the next moment. Because this treasure is too shocking, we've received young brother Xianxia's agreement and won't announce it in public this time. Everyone instantly exploded into an uproar. Even the name of the treasure actually won't be announced? It seems like it's either because this treasure can't compare to the other presents at all, and the Shenyuan clan's actions were done for none other than to flatter this junior, Xianxia, or that treasure is really unequaled in its rarity, and once it's revealed, it would be sufficient to cause all sorts of disturbances. So they concealed it. So exactly which possibility is it? All of them weren't able to obtain an answer from the master of ceremony, so they successively shot their gazes at Xianxia, causing the latter to instantly become the center of attention within the hall. Xianxia was naturally clearly aware of what the present he gave was, and he was very clearly aware why that master of ceremony had concealed the name of the treasure. However, he wouldn't tell anyone else. Ha ha ha! Everyone let that little fellow off. However, I can guarantee, this present is so rare that it has even exceeded my expectations, and it can be considered as an enormous pleasant surprise. It was at this moment that Shenyuan Pashao roared with laughter as he spoke, and he helped Xianxia out of his predicament. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone instantly dared confirm that the present Xianxia gave was probably really an extraordinary precious treasure. After all, Shenyuan Pashao was an immortal king, and as the host of the birthday ceremony, there was entirely no need for him to play tricks and fool them. However, in this way, everyone felt ever more curious in their hearts. Exactly what is that treasure? It actually caused Shenyuan Pashao, this existence that has just advanced into the immortal king realm, to feel that it's an enormous pleasant surprise. This is extremely extraordinary. Of course, because Shenyuan Pashao had asked them to let Xianxia off, they naturally wouldn't shamelessly ask Xianxia about it again. Only the guests around Xianxia felt rather uncomfortable in their hearts. Earlier, they'd been trying to educate Xianxia, and they seemed as if they were teaching a junior a lesson. Yet now, even though they didn't know exactly what Xianxia's present was, merely the fact that this present could be placed as the final present and obtain Shenyuan Pashao's pleasant surprise was sufficient to prove exactly how extraordinary it was. This sort of change in events was like a shapeless slap that caused their faces to burn with pain, and they didn't dare to flaunt their seniority before Xianxia and seek a sense of existence any longer. Axiu couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle when she noticed this scene, and her eyes that seemed like puddles of shallow water formed into crescents as she laughed with extreme happiness. "Look at all these old fellows. They really changed quickly." Axiu sent a voice transmission to Xianxia. Xianxia shrugged and felt very helpless. He swore to God, he really had never thought about counterattacking those great figures in such a manner, and from the beginning until the end, it was they that brought it upon themselves. So how could anyone do anything about it? After that, no further twists and turns occurred during the birthday ceremony, and Xianxia left halfway through. Couldn't be helped. The birthday ceremony had transformed into an occasion where all the great figures chatted with each other, and he was unable to converse with them at all, so it was better to leave as soon as possible. When he left, he naturally brought Qi Xiaoyu and Lu Jianheng along with him. On the other hand, not long after Xianxia returned to the sword room, Shenyuan Pashao announced during the birthday ceremony for all the great figures of the immortal dimension to hear. From today onwards, if anyone goes against Xianxia, then it's going against the entire Shenyuan clan. As soon as these words were spoken, it was no different than a thunderclap that shook everyone present there. At such an important moment, Shenyuan Pashao had represented the entire Shenyuan clan to suddenly announce such a matter. So how could not cause a multitude of thoughts to flash in the minds of all? Most people guessed that all of this was probably related to the enmity between Xianxia and the Wuxia clan. After all, the entire immortal dimension was clearly aware that Xianxia had already shed all pretenses with the Wuxia clan, and now that the Shenyuan clan actually announced such a matter in public before so many great figures of the immortal dimension, the Shenyuan clan obviously intended to stand up for Xianxia. In other words, if the Wuxia clan dared to look for trouble with Xianxia, or if Xianxia looked for trouble with the Wuxia clan, then the Shenyuan clan would definitely not stand by idly. If this guess was true, then it was extremely shocking. After all, no matter if it was the Shenyuan clan or the Wuxia clan, they were both existences that were ranked amongst the 7 great ancient clans. Now, they faintly showed signs of forming a hostile relationship because of Xianxia, and if news of this were to spread, it would definitely cause all the great powers in the immortal dimension to be shocked. Why did the Shenyuan clan act in this way? Some people guessed that it was because Xianxia had a good relationship with the little princess of the Shenyuan clan, Shenyuan Xiu, and it was very likely that the two of them had already become Dao companions in the presence of all the seniors of the Shenyuan clan. There were also some that guessed that it was because of that present Xianxia gave during the birthday ceremony. After all, at that time, even Shenyuan Pashao himself had said that the present Xianxia gave was an enormous pleasant surprise to him. Since it could be considered as an enormous even to an immortal king, then how could it possibly be ordinary? Of course, there were all sorts of other guesses. But without any doubt, this announcement of the Shenyuan clans would definitely cause the Wuxia clan to face even greater pressure when dealing with Xianxia. Some intelligent people even noticed that even though Xianxia seemed to have no background at all, the resources he possessed had long since arrived at a shocking degree. Firstly, he was the #1 student in Dao Emperor Academy's inner court, and he possessed extraordinary natural talent and a peerless combat strength. Moreover, his reputation in the immortal dimension was like the scorching sun in the midday sky, and he even possessed the Dao Emperor's inheritance. In other words, merely possessing such an identity made it extremely likely that he would succeed the position of dean in Dao Emperor Academy in the future. It was common knowledge that Dao Emperor Academy was the #1 academy in the immortal dimension, and how many people were able to assume the position of dean from the ancient times until now. Moreover, amongst all the powers in the immortal dimensions, how many of them could compare in status to the Dean of Tao Emperor Academy? Besides that, She had obtained the full support of one of the 7 great ancient clans, the Shenyuan clan. Now, in this way, would anyone dare to take him as a student of the younger generation that didn't possess any background at all? If it was said that Shi's past reputation was entirely obtained from his own hard work, then after he obtained the Tao Emperor's inheritance and the support of the Shenyuan clan, the reputation he possessed was covered in layer upon layer of colors that struck awe in the hearts of others. Under such circumstances, what sort of reaction would the Wuxia clan that was irreconcilable with Shi since long ago make? Would a conflict erupt between the Shenyuan clan and the Wuxia clan because of Shi? What about Tao Emperor Academy? What sort of decision would it make when facing such a dispute? After the Shenyuan clan announced this news, it could be considered like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples on the surface of a lake. In merely a single day of time, it caused the entire immortal dimension to start paying attention to this matter, and they paid attention to the dispute and conflict behind this. Of course, there was another question that made everyone even more curious. Exactly what was the present that Shi gave during Shenyuan Paxiao's birthday ceremony? Shi wasn't aware of all of this, yet he'd guessed that it would happen since the beginning. The reason was extremely simple. Before he participated in the birthday ceremony, Xianxia had told him that the Shenyuan clan had made such a decision, and it was precisely because of this decision that he'd given Shenyuan Paxiao an enormous pleasant surprise. This wasn't an exchange of benefits. Strictly speaking, it could be considered as an exchange of gifts. However, the gifts that they exchanged were just slightly astounding. The sword room. She was reading a jade slip with his head lowered. The jade slip recorded that various rumors that were created after Shenyuan Paxiao's announcement. The jade slip was sent over to him by Xianxia, and she was sitting lazily at the side right now. There are actually people that guessed we've become Tao companions? She put the jade slip down and looked at Xianxia with a strange expression. Xianxia puckered her tender little mouth and said casually, "It's only a guess. Could it be that you intend to take it seriously?" As she spoke, her clear eyes spun while she glanced at Shi with a pretty gaze. The flirtatious expression she revealed at that instant carried a shocking charm of its own. She coughed dryly and hurriedly changed the topic. "However, I really have to thank you this time. Truthfully speaking, being able to obtain the full support of the Shenyuan clan greatly exceeded my expectations. Didn't you give my grandfather a Tao fruit spirit? If he still didn't make some sort of show for it, he would really be going too far." Xianxia spoke casually. "Grandfather?" She was astounded. "So, Senior Shenyuan Paxiao was your grandfather?" Xianxia said angrily. "The entire immortal dimensions knows that, yet it just so happens that you've only come to an understanding now. You're simply heartless." She was slightly embarrassed. He had indeed paid no attention to Xianxia's origins, and he was merely aware that she was the little princess of the Shenyuan clan. As for who her father, mother, and ancestors were, he hadn't found out about it at all. It wasn't that he wasn't concerned about her, and it was because he felt there was entirely no need to do this. The relationship he had with Xianxia wasn't because of how prominent she was. "Wait!" Suddenly, she shook his head. "What?" Xianxia raised her brows. "When I attended the birthday ceremony, you'd already told me that the Shenyuan clan would support me, and I still hadn't had the chance to present the Tao fruit spirit at that time." As he spoke, she looked at Xianxia with a serious expression. "Xianxia, I've always had a question in my heart. Can you tell me exactly why you've always been helping me?" This question had been kept in Shi's heart for too long. It wasn't that he suspected Xianxia had other intentions, and it was instead that since he knew Xianxia, she'd always been silently helping him. Up until now, she'd even made the entire Shenyuan clan support him. So he would truly be heartless if he still acted as if he didn't realize something. He would simply be no different than a heartless and ungrateful person. At this moment, Shi's expression was unprecedentedly serious. His gaze was extremely deep, and it caused Xianxia to be unable to help but panic in her heart and not dare meet his gaze. Xianxia lowered her head while her beautiful brows knit slightly together, and her exquisite and pretty fair face was covered in a struggling expression. She seemed to be very hesitant. She wasn't in a hurry, and he looked silently at Axiu. The atmosphere became deathly silent for a moment. After quite some time, Axiu bit her teeth and raised her head, and she glared angrily at She before she said angrily, "All right, I'll tell you all right." She smiled bitterly. "I'm not forcing you. It's just that you've helped me too much, and if this continues, then I probably won't be able to eat and sleep in the future." "What do you mean by being unable to eat and sleep? It looks to me like you're too suspicious." Axiu grunted, and then she bit her moist lips and sighed lightly in the end. "Actually, you'll understand everything after you rescue Auntie Wuxia Shui." Shi's eyes instantly opened wide. Could it be that all of this is related to my mother? This had really exceeded his expectations. How do I put it? It's a matter from a very long time ago. At that time, my father still wasn't the patriarch of the Xianxia clan, and he once traveled the immortal dimension with Auntie Wuxia Shui. Axiu took a deep breath and told him about everything in the end, and her voice that was clear, melodious, and pleasing to the ear resounded endlessly within the abode. It turned out that when Axiu's father, the current patriarch of the Xianxia clan, Xianxia Xiao, was young, he was one of the people that adored Wuxia Shui. For the sake of obtaining Wuxia Shui's heart, Wuxia Xiao had even left the clan to follow Wuxia Shui wherever she went for a few hundreds of years. Unfortunately, his love was unrequited. Wuxia Shui had always taken Xianxia Xiao to be a brother, and Xianxia Xiao was clearly aware of this as well, so he couldn't help but be slightly dejected. However, he still stayed bitterly with her. Regretfully, after the passage of many years, he was still unable to move Wuxia Shui's heart, and he gave up completely. However, Xianxia Xiao was a strange man. After he experienced this tribulation of love, he'd become completely enlightened, and he stopped being infatuated with Wuxia Shui and took her to be a friend that understood him instead. Later on, he even made an agreement with Wuxia Shui that if they each had a son and daughter of their own, then these two children should be married, and it could be considered as a form of happy fate. Wuxia Shui naturally agreed to this. Moreover, something worthy of mentioning was that Wuxia Shui was still single at that time, and Shi's father, Ling Jun, still hadn't made an appearance. After he found out about all of this, Shi's jaw almost hit the floor from shock. So, in this way, the two of us might have been betrothed before birth? When she heard these words, Axiu's pretty face flushed red, and then she said angrily, "That's an agreement formed between my father and your mother. It isn't related to me at all." She scratched his head. I'm just slightly shocked. If both of us were men or women, then what do you think would happen to this agreement of theirs?" Axiu had obviously thought of this question a long time ago, and she answered without the slightest hesitation. "They'll naturally become sworn brothers or sisters." She was speechless. "That really is a good idea." "Humph. Don't think that I'm foolish enough to take a liking to you and intend to become Dao companions with you." Axiu glanced proudly at Shi. "All those years ago when I found out about this from my father, I was extremely furious in my heart. I wasn't even born yet, so how could he find me a Dao companion like that? Thus, I left the clan at night and headed to the mortal dimension with my ancestral uncle's help." Shi was stunned. "You wouldn't have come to look for me at that time, right?" Axiu grunted and said, "Of course. At that time, I was constantly thinking how I should teach you a good lesson and make you obediently give up such thoughts. It was even to the extent that I decided that I would kill you if I didn't have another choice." When she spoke up to hear, she glared fiercely at Shi, and then she couldn't help but burst out with laughter. She laughed to the point even her eyes formed two crescents, and then she said, "Fortunately, when I met you, I had a rather good impression of you, and the food you cooked was nice. So I was barely able to restrain myself from dealing with you." She was completely speechless. The cause and effect of the matter was actually like this. Of course, he knew that Axiu was mostly joking. However, the facts were probably like this, and this perfectly explained why Axiu had constantly did her utmost best to help him in the mortal dimension all those years ago. Now, the Xianxia clan had announced that it would support him, and it was definitely because of the efforts put in by the patriarch Xianxia. After all, according to what Xiu said, Xianxia could be considered to possess deep friendship with his mother, Wuxia. When he realized this, she suddenly felt slight admiration towards his father that he'd never met. My mother was an heir of one of the great ancient clans all those years ago, and she was a genius that even a peerless figure like Xianxia was unable to take the heart of. Yet as a cultivator that came from a clan in the mortal dimension, my father actually won my mother's heart. This ability really is extraordinary. The corners of Xi's mouth curled up slightly. Xiu seemed to have seen through his thoughts and couldn't help but grunt before she said, "Are you thinking that my father is inferior to your father?" She was stunned, and then he smiled bitterly as he said, "Is there any need to compare them like this?" Xiu puckered her lips and said, "Don't think that your father is just a tiny cultivator from the mortal dimension. According to my father, your father's origins are not simple at all. Otherwise, he wouldn't just watch as your father took Auntie's Wuxia away." She was shocked in his heart because Xianxia was the current patriarch of the Xianyuan clan. Yet he actually said that Chun Lingjun's origins weren't simple at all? What does this mean? She inadvertently recalled the information he'd heard about his father in the recent years. He remembered that the sect master of the 9 Radiant Sword sect, when Huiting, had once said that a grand meeting of the extraordinary was held in the Dark Reverie all those years ago, and it gathered all the top figures of the various great powers in the Dark Reverie. It was led by the sect master of the saintly land of Ascension at that time, Miao Yunji, and they'd headed to the northern underworld ocean with the intention of obtaining a divine treasure, the Star Manor. Later on, the Star Manor was obtained by Xi's mother, Wuxia, and Miao Yunji and the others originally intended to seize it from her. Yet they were all defeated by Wuxia. In the end, it was Xi's father, Chun Lingjun, that asked for them to be spared. It was precisely because of this that Miao Yunji and all the great figures of the Dark Reverie owed Chun Lingjun a favor, and it was precisely because of this that Chun Lingjun was able to enter the immortal dimension through a secret realm under the help of the saintly land of Ascension and the other great figures. At that time, Xi's impression of his father wasn't very clear, and he merely felt that the reason his father's strength was so formidable was mostly because of his mother's help. Later on, she met Bai Wanqing, and he found out about even more matters of the past from Bai Wanqing. However, Bai Wanqing didn't know much about Chun Lingjun, and it just allowed Shi to understand a single thing. His father's strength was even stronger than he'd expected. When he entered the immortal dimension, he found out from Ling Bai that his father, Chun Lingjun, had entered the prehistoric ruins after arriving at the immortal dimension. Moreover, even Heaven Trampler had heard many rumors related to his father. Unfortunately, when Shi arrived at the prehistoric ruins, he'd missed his father again, and the clues he obtained were extremely limited as well. However, he faintly understood from all of this that his father was absolutely not simple, yet all of this couldn't be verified. At this moment, when he found out from Xiu that even the patriarch of the Xianyuan clan, Xianxia, felt that his father, Chun Lingjun, wasn't simple at all, she didn't feel suddenly enlightened at all, and he instead felt even more perplexed. Exactly what sort of figure is he? If he's only an ordinary little cultivator from the mortal dimension, then how could he possibly obtain my mother's heart? How could he possibly enter the prehistoric ruins? And how could he possibly make Xianxia feel that he wasn't simple at all? Actually, there's entirely no need for you to think so much about it. Perhaps you'll obtain the answers you want after your rescue Auntie's Wuxia, said Xiu from the side. Shi instantly awoke from his deep contemplation, and then he nodded and said firmly, "You're right. I'll definitely rescue my mother from Iris Immortal Prison, and it'll be very soon. Immortals and devils flee from it while gods can't shake it." This was the Immortal Dimension's evaluation of Iris Immortal Prison, and it was a renowned prison of the Grand Tao in the Immortal Dimension. A very long time ago, she found out from Bai Wanqing that since his mother, Wuxia, was captured and brought back to the Immortal Dimension, she'd always been imprisoned within Iris Immortal Prison. At the same time, she was already clearly aware that a portion of the Wuxia clan's members were secretly taking care of his mother, so he didn't have to worry too much about her safety. However, He wouldn't be careless because the moment the Shenyuan clan announced to the entire immortal dimension that it would support him, it would cause the Wuxia clan to react. Under such circumstances, how could Chun Shi dare to be careless? His reaction to this was extremely simple. He instructed Axiu to help him pay attention to the internal state of the Wuxia clan at all times, and he would immediately take action once an internal conflict occurred. If that moment really came, then it meant that he would completely declare war with the Wuxia clan. Of course, Chun Shi could only calm himself and reside within Dao Emperor Academy until that time, while making the best use of his time to improve his strength for the sake of preparing to rescue his mother. Axiu left hastily with Chun Shi's instructions, and only Chun Shi remained within the abode. He took a deep breath and didn't hesitate at all to turn around and enter the world of stars. Above the Saint Dao is the Grand Dao of Immortal Kings. If I want to charge into the half-step Immortal King realm, then I need to start with the three supreme Grand Daos of time, space, and life and death. Chun Shi sat cross-legged as he thought deeply with his eyes closed. The vast starry sky above him was suffused with piercingly cold starlight, and it was tranquil and calm, whereas his surroundings started to surge with strands of the aura of the Saint Dao, and it was brilliant, blazing, and illuminated the 9 heavens. After he returned from the mortal dimension that day, he'd cultivated in the world of stars for 15 years, and he'd finally completely fused the final enduring divine crest into his Saint Dao and completely established a talisman Saint Dao of his own. In other words, merely in terms of cultivation, Chun Shi had already attained a state of perfection in the Saint Immortal realm, and he'd established and grasped a Saint Dao of his own. At this moment, every single move he made seemed like a saint had descended to the world, and every single word he spoke was filled with the might to educate. If it was during the primeval times, then it was sufficient for him to start a sect and pass down his Dao throughout the world. On the other hand, amongst his peers, Chun Shi wasn't afraid of any opponents any longer. Or to put it more simply, Chun Shi could be considered as an existence that crushed all cultivators at the same realm as him. This wasn't exaggerated. After all, his foundation was almost 100 times deeper than his peers, and he himself grasped the supreme inheritance of the infinite divine talisman from Oracle Mountain and a sword Dao cultivation that had attained perfection in the sword god realm. Now, he'd established a talisman Saint Dao of his own. When all of this was combined together, it was obvious how extremely formidable his combat strength would be. Such brilliant combat strength could even be described as unprecedented in the world. However, Chun Shi's horizons were different now, and he'd long placed his eyes onto the path towards becoming a god, so he naturally wouldn't be complacent because of this. At the bottom of it all, in Chun Shi's current opinion, the Saint Immortal realm was only the first step towards the path of gods, and there was still the half-step Immortal King realm, God rank realm, and various other extraordinary peaks to climb. On the other hand, no matter if it was for the sake of taking revenge on the Wuxia clan or going against the sovereign sect, it was impossible for Chun Shi to be satisfied with his current state, and it was even to the extent that his cultivation had become his one and only shortcoming within his plans. If it wasn't for that, he would have probably killed his way into the Wuxia clan a long time ago. Of course, the only thing Chun Shi had to do now was improve his cultivation and charge into the half-step Immortal King realm. The half-step Immortal King realm was the divide between the Saint Immortal realm and the Immortal King realm, and it seemed to be only half a step away from the Immortal King realm, yet it couldn't be compared to the Immortal King realm at all. But even then, it wasn't so easy to advance from the Saint Immortal realm into the half-step Immortal King realm. Conversely, artificial Saint Immortals had no hope of advancing into this realm. In other words, only natural Saint Immortals had the qualifications to seek the half-step Immortal King realm, and the difficulty to accomplish this was extremely great. The reason was that before one could charge into the half-step Immortal King realm, the 3 enormous mountains of time, space, and life and death stood in one's path. Only by comprehending a trace of the profundities of these 3 supreme laws and attaining initial proficiency in it would one be able to step past the threshold of the half-step Immortal King realm. Otherwise, even if one cultivated bitterly for countless years, one could only remain stuck in the Saint Immortal realm. Chun Shi knew nothing about the temporal laws, and he similarly knew nothing about the life and death laws. Chun Shi only had a certain level of attainment in the spatial laws. For example, the spatial divine crest he possessed now had already attained the level of spatial ripples, and it was sufficient to be compared with half-step immortal kings. So if Xianxia wanted to advance into the half-step immortal king realm, then he only had to comprehend the supreme laws of time and life as well as death in order to break through. However, even if he only had to comprehend these laws and not grasp them completely, it was absolutely not so easy. For example, Xianxia was sitting down cross-legged within the world of stars while ceaselessly deducing his understanding towards time and life and death, yet he wasn't able to figure anything out. He wasn't even able to come into contact with the threshold of comprehension, let alone comprehend its profundities. This won't do. If this continues, then I'll just be waiting time for nothing. Not to mention advancing into the half-step immortal king realm within 100 years, it would be useless no matter how much time I had. After a long time, Xianxia suddenly opened his eyes while his brows knit together tightly. In his plans, he had to step foot into the half-step immortal king realm within 100 years of time. Because within his deduction, the internal conflict within the Wuxia clan would probably fully erupt within 100 years of time. Under such circumstances, if he still didn't advance into the half-step immortal king realm, then even if he was able to rely on the strengths of others to take revenge on the Wuxia clan, he would only be reduced to a spectator and would be utterly unable to participate in it. That wasn't something Xianxia was willing to see happen. In the end, Xianxia decided to see the guidance of the seniors in Dao Emperor Academy because trying by himself behind closed doors was really a waste of time. Dao Emperor Academy Sword Sharpening Peak. This was Hua Jiankong's residence and place of cultivation. Sword Sharpening Peak was a lone peak that towered into the sky, and it just happened to seem like a peerless sword that pierced the sky. Every single flower, plant, rock, sand. Even the air was filled with a strand of dense sword insight that was extremely oppressive. If an ordinary student came here, the student would be utterly unable to take a single step on this peak. Couldn't be helped. The sword insight was too terrifying, so once one trespassed forcefully, it would lead to either injury or death. You want to charge into the half-step immortal king realm? On the peak of Sword Sharpening Peak, Hua Jiankong, who sat cross-legged there, swiftly stood up and glanced at Xianxia with surprise. Exactly. Xianxia nodded. After he decided to seek help, he directly left the sword room and found this place. Hua Jiankong had always possessed a reserved and aloof disposition. When Xianxia came seeking for guidance from him, he didn't ask why Xianxia didn't look for the help of others and chose him instead. Nor did he speak about the fact that Xianxia had just advanced into the Saint Immortal realm a few years ago. Or perhaps, from the beginning until the end, he didn't waste his breath at all. After he obtained confirmation from Xianxia, he said directly, "Come with me." He turned around and teleported as soon as he finished speaking. This sort of decisive style caused Xianxia to be unable to help but be stunned. After that, he hurriedly chased after Hua Jiankong. Yet he couldn't help but sigh with emotion in his heart. Who said that it isn't easy to engage with Senior Hua Jiankong? He's cold on the outside and warm on the inside. At the same time, at Iris Continent's Wuxia clan, Shenyuan clan, for the sake of a damnable bastard, you actually didn't hesitate to go against my Wuxia clan. Within a grand hall, Wuxia Feng was angered to the point of almost gnashing his teeth into pieces, while the jade slip in his hand had even been crushed into powder, and this obviously showed exactly how furious he was at this moment. Patriarch, Mr. Wei has arrived. Right at this moment, an old man that seemed like a manager appeared outside the hall and spoke in a light voice. Wuxia Feng's eyes narrowed, and then he took a deep breath while his expression instantly recovered its calm. He waved his hand and said, "Quickly invite Mr. Wei in." As soon as he finished speaking, Wei Xing, that wore a violet robe and had a refined bearing, swiftly entered the hall, and he grinned as he said, "Patriarch Wuxia is probably so infuriated because you're vexed by that announcement from the Shenyuan clan, right?" "Humph. Mr. Wei, could it be that you came to laugh at me?" Wuxia Feng grunted coldly. Wei Xing sat down slowly on a chair at the side, and then he said with a smile, "Patriarch Wuxia, you've misunderstood. I've just so happened to have come here to help the Wuxia clan resolve this problem." "Oh? What do you mean?" Wuxia Feng glanced at him. To tell you the truth, I've already convinced a senior in my sect, and I can mobilize some forces to fully support the Wuxia clan to get through this crisis. Wei Xing was filled with confidence as he said, so long as the Wuxia clan is willing to continue collaborating with me, then not to mention the Shenyuan clan, even if it's even more powers like the Shenyuan clan, it'll be utterly unable to do anything to us. Zhuo Feng's eyes narrowed slightly before it erupted with a bright glow. He stared fixedly at Wei Xing and observed him for a long time before Zhuo Feng probed. Mr. Wei, could it be that the experts of your sect are going to interfere in this matter? Wei Xing shook his head. Patriarch Zhuo, there's no need to keep on guessing. I'll only ask you a single question. Are you willing to collaborate? Zhuo Feng grunted. A collaboration is fine. However, I want to know exactly what Mr. Wei's objective is. Wei Xing stuck out a single finger. I only have a single condition. Kill that kid, Qian Shi, within 100 years of time. That simple? Zhuo Feng's brows raised. To be blunt, if it wasn't for the sake of killing that kid, Qian Shi, do you think I would take the initiative to seek the cooperation of your Zhuo clan? Wei Xing spoke slowly. The meaning behind his words was that no matter how extraordinary the Zhuo clan was, he didn't take the Zhuo clan seriously, and the only reason he was collaborating with the Zhuo clan was that they both had a common enemy. These words were blunt indeed, and it caused Zhuo Feng's face to sink slightly. But right after that he nodded and said, all right, I can agree to this condition. However, I advise you that it's best for you to not try to obtain things that you shouldn't. His words carried a trace of warning, yet Wei Xing seemed as if he hadn't heard it all. He roared light-heartedly with laughter and said, Patriarch Zhuo's choice is undoubtedly the best choice. As he spoke, he flipped his palm, and an ancient command token appeared there before he said proudly, I presume that Patriarch Zhuo is clearly aware that my sect has positioned many pawns within the immortal dimension. Now, these pawns will become our greatest reliance. Let me ask you, in this way, would the Shenyuan clan be anything to be afraid of? Zhuo Feng's spirits were instantly refreshed when he heard these words, and the agitation in his heart was completely wiped away. When he noticed that Zhuo Feng was completely moved, Wei Xing struck while the iron was hot. Presently, I've clearly found out that Qian Shi is hiding in Dao Emperor Academy, and it'll probably require some special methods to kill him. Zhuo Feng restrained his thoughts and calmed down completely when he heard this. The sovereign sect stood behind Wei Xing. So even if he agreed to collaborate with Wei Xing, Zhuo Feng still maintained a trace of vigilance in his heart. After all, the reputation of the sovereign sect was truly too terrible in the three dimensions. It pursued the path of emotionlessness, so no matter who it was that cooperated with the sovereign sect, that person would have no choice but to be slightly vigilant. May I ask, what sort of special methods are you talking about, Mr. Wei? Asked Zhuo Feng. Wei Xing smiled and avoided the question, and he answered with a question instead. Presently, the Zhuo clan is filled with internal conflict. I wonder if Patriarch Zhuo has any plans. Zhuo Feng instantly frowned, and he said after quite some time, conflicts can be resolved in the end, right? He paused for a moment and suddenly said with a smile, of course, if Mr. Wei is willing to lend me a hand, then my Zhuo clan will definitely remember this kindness. Wei Xing smiled as well. Since Patriarch Zhuo has spoken, then how could I not agree? When they spoke up to hear, both of them had understood each other's thoughts. It was none other than Zhuo Feng intended to rely on Wei Xing's strength to crush the conflict within the Zhuo clan, whereas Wei Xing intended to seize this opportunity to drag the Zhuo clan to the sovereign sect's side. After all was said and done, it could be considered to be an exchange of benefits. As for whether the Zhuo clan would be completely controlled by the sovereign sect or if it would burn its bridges and kick the sovereign sect away in the end, all of that depended on both of their abilities. To resist external forces, one must maintain internal security. Why don't we take action immediately and deal with the internal problems of the Zhuo clan first? Wei Xing probed. Haha, Mr. Wei, why the hurry? Zhuo Feng smiled spuriously as he spoke. To tell you the truth, I heard that those clansmen that going against Patriarch Wuxia are all related to Chen Shi's mother, Wuxia Shui. Since it's like that, then we should naturally utilize this to threaten Chen Shi and force him to come to us obediently. Wei Xing spoke frankly. Doing this will be able to help Patriarch Wuxia suppress the internal strife and threaten Chen Shi in one go. It can be said to be killing two birds with one stone, so why not? Wuxia Feng went silent for a long time before he suddenly asked. All those years ago, my father suddenly passed away. That matter was related to your sect as well, right? Wei Xing was stunned while his eyes narrowed slightly, and then he couldn't help but chuckle after some time. Patriarch Wuxia, why do you say so? Humph. Wuxia Feng grunted coldly. Perhaps Mr. Wei isn't clearly aware of what happened all those years ago, but your sect is definitely very clearly aware of it. Of course, I'm not rejecting the collaboration with Mr. Wei, but Mr. Wei better not think that you're able to conceal everything. Wei Xing's expression remained unchanged, and he nodded in an extremely serious manner instead before he said, Of course. Then may I know if Mr. Wei can tell me exactly how many forces you actually possess now? Wuxia Feng asked in a casual manner. Wei Xing grinned as he stared at Wuxia Feng for a long time, and then he said, A lot. It absolutely exceeds Patriarch Wuxia's imagination. At the very least, the seniors of Vast Sky, Grand Desolation, and Bitter Silence Academy are very happy to cooperate with us. He paused for a moment and continued. Of course, this is only a portion of the forces my sect positioned within the immortal dimension. If Patriarch Wuxia requires it, then there'll be even more forces to help the Wuxia clan sweep through all barriers. Wuxia Feng went silent for a long time when he heard this, and he said with a low voice in the end, Since it's like that, then I'll be blunt with Mr. Wei. From today onwards, I'll pressure those clansmen of mine that oppose me. At that time, I'll have to rely on Mr. Wei's strength. Wei Xing nodded. I'm happy to be of service. On that same day, Wuxia Feng took the time to pay Wuxia Huanglin a visit, and they spoke privately for a long time. On that very night, Wuxia Feng summoned a clan meeting, and he gathered all the higher-ups and seniors of the clan together before domineeringly announcing that from today onwards, internal strife within the clan was prohibited. Once it was noticed, then he would punish them without any mercy. At the very least, one would be expelled from the clan, and it would even amount to a death sentence. As soon as these words were spoken, it instantly caused all the higher-ups to be shocked. For example, Wuxia Faming and the other higher-ups that supported Wuxia Shui were furious. However, they forcefully endured it under Wuxia Faming's signal, and they seemed to have tacitly agreed to Wuxia Feng's actions. Everyone was clearly aware that no matter what Wuxia Feng said, he would actually start to take suppressive action from today onwards, and the target of his suppression was obviously all the clansmen that were led by Wuxia Faming. For a time, the Wuxia clan was filled with anxiety, and it seemed as if it was showing signs of an utter eruption of its internal strife. Would Wuxia Faming and the others do nothing and wait for death to arrive? Obviously, they wouldn't. Wuxia Feng had guessed this since the beginning. So for the sake of preventing the internal strife from erupting, on that very day and under Wuxia Feng's suggestion, Wei Xing arrived before all the higher-ups of the Wuxia clan with a grin on his face. Moreover, it wasn't just Wei Xing alone. He'd come with some seniors of Vast Sky, Bitter Silence, and Grand Desolation Academy that had made a name for themselves a long time ago, and some half-step immortal kings from the other continents. At this moment, everyone finally understood that the reasons Wuxia Feng acted in such a domineering manner was because he'd obtained the support of extremely formidable external assistants. In the past, relying on external assistants to interfere in the major matters of the clan was absolutely a taboo, and it would incur the aversion of the entire Wuxia clan. However, at such a critical moment, no one dared to criticize Wuxia Feng, because no matter what, Wuxia Feng was the current patriarch of the Wuxia clan in the end, and Wuxia Huanglin and numerous other higher-ups of the Wuxia clan stood behind him. Since even they'd tacitly approved all of this, would anyone dare to criticize Wuxia Feng? As for Wuxia Faming and the others, they'd always been the targets of Wuxia Feng's suppression, so criticizing him or not made no difference. On the other hand, If they dared to criticize him, then it would give Zhuoqiufeng a chance and he might crush them all on the spot. When facing this string of actions from Zhuoqiufeng, Zhuoqiufeng and all the other higher-ups chose to maintain their silence in the end, and they didn't resist, as if they intended to admit defeat. However, Zhuoqiufeng was unable to arouse any happiness in his heart, because in this way, he would instead have no excuse to crush Zhuoqiufeng and the others, and if this continued, then the existence of Zhuoqiufeng and the others would be a latent trouble for Zhuoqiufeng. Why not completely wipe out all of these clansmen in one fell sweep? This was Wei Xing's suggestion. However, it received a direct refusal from Zhuoqiufeng, because he'd thought of an even more reliable method. He would first reclaim the authority possessed by Zhuoqiufeng and the others before seizing their positions as elders, and then he would deal with each of them one by one and force them to submit. In this way, he would be able to deal with the internal dangers the Zhuoqiu clan faced without shedding any blood. Of course, Zhuoqiufeng didn't mind revealing his ruthless side to those unyielding fellows that would rather die than submit. Doing this would probably consume even more time. Wei Xing couldn't help but frown without end when he heard of Zhuoqiufeng's plan. Actually, he was clearly aware that Zhuoqiufeng was acting in this way because Zhuoqiufeng hadn't completely let down his guard against him, and Zhuoqiufeng was worried that he would seize this opportunity to allow the forces of the sovereign sect to infiltrate the Zhuoqiu clan. Mr. Wei, there's no need to be in a hurry. Didn't your distinguished sect say that it's fine so long as that kid, Xianxia, is killed with 100 years of time? That's 100 years of time. It's sufficient for me to completely eliminate and clean up the internal conflict within my clan. Zhuoqiufeng grinned as he patted Wei Xing on the shoulder in a complacent manner. Wei Xing sighed and didn't speak any further. Yet he laughed coldly in his heart and said, "Humph! If my sovereign sect desires to encroach of the Zhuoqiu clan, then how could it possibly be something that you, Zhuoqiufeng, can stop? Never mind. It wouldn't be too late to deal with your Zhuoqiu clan after we deal with Xianxia." A scene of spring with misty rain and brilliant peach blossoms that were gorgeous like the sunset. Xianxia gazed at the scene before him. This was a beautiful and enchanting scene of spring. The sky was completely clear while a lush breeze blew by, and peach blossoms were in full bloom throughout the surroundings that were covered in verdant grass. It was a picturesque scene. This is the realm of time that the Dean himself set up. It's completely made from the temporal grand Tao. All those years ago, when I was comprehending the temporal laws, I cultivated in meditation here for a period of time. If you intend to comprehend the energy of time, then perhaps you can start here. Hua Jiankong's voice still reverberated by his ears. Yet Hua Jiankong had already vanished. The realm of time. This was the place of cultivation that Hua Jiankong had prepared for Xianxia. It was filled with the energy of time, and whether he was able to comprehend it successfully depended entirely on Xianxia's own fortune. At this moment, the place Xianxia stood at was a peach forest within the realm of time, and it represented spring. Spring was the season when vitality emerged from the ground and all things started to sprout. Xianxia stood here and pondered deeply for a long time. In the end, he shook his head and stopped thinking, because he'd already tried, and it was utterly impossible to locate a trace of the energy of time by merely utilizing his immortal sense, Tao heart, or soul to investigate this expanse of the heavens and the earth. Continuing to think about it was just a waste of energy, so it was better to stop thinking. He had his hands behind his back as he walked forward. He passed through the peach forest, strode over a winding clear stream, and just happened to witness a wisp of the evening rays of the sun dye the sky. In next to no time, the veil of night descended, and specks of stars arose slowly into the sky. The soft cries of insects resounded through the heavens and the earth while the breeze of the night blew gently, causing the trees to rustle. It was an extraordinarily tranquil scene. This ink-black night was empty and silent while only Xianxia walked alone in this expanse of the heavens and the earth. His heart gradually calmed down. He thought of nothing and just glanced at everything that passed by. He looked at the mountains, the streams, the scenery. He stood still and observed carefully if it pleased him, and he left hastily if it didn't. He acted as he pleased and moved at will. If he had the mood, He would pull out a blade of grass with a casual raise of his hand or pluck a few peaches to be added to his wine. The ancient trees, enormous rocks, waterfalls, his figure could be seen everywhere, and the fireflies in the night, the butterflies amongst the flowers, and the mayflies on the surface of the water, everything had become something he played with. When he lost the mood, he would flick his sleeve and leave. He'd slashed apart the mountains, severed the water, and he'd stroll through the area in an instant. After that, the veil of the night dissipated, and a scorching sun soared into the sky and hung there. It dispersed the ink-black veil of night, allowing the heavens and the earth to enter daytime, and then time moved from spring into summer. The gorgeous sun hung high in the sky while waves of heat curled up, and lotus flowers bloomed in the great heat. Day and night were exchanged overnight while spring changed to summer. What a pity that I'm unable to touch it. She looked up and drank a mouthful of strong wine while he smiled. He had an unrestrained bearing, and his hair hung down loosely while he continued walking forward with large strides. Another day passed, summer left and autumn arrived. Leaves whistled down to the ground as the heavens and the earth were filled with a scene of withering. She was still walking forward tirelessly with an unrestrained disposition, and he finally stopped moving when autumn passed to welcome winter. When he turned around again, the scene before his eyes instantaneously changed. It was still that expanse of peach trees that were in full bloom while the plants in the surroundings were luxuriant, and the spring sun and warm breeze were intoxicating. It was spring again. On the other hand, the place where Xianxia stood was surprisingly the place he'd stood when he'd just entered the realm of time. Everywhere that met his eye was a picturesque scene of spring, and it was just like the scene he'd seen earlier. While I kept moving forward, time continued without end, and when I suddenly turned around, the scene had returned to how it was at the beginning. The changes of time really are the most difficult to figure out. Xianxia stared blankly for a long time while the scene within his eyes swiftly changed between spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The scene changed without end, and it overlapped endlessly. This sort of change occurred between night and day, and it was revealed in the changes in the landscape and scenery. They were either filled with exuberant vitality, flourishing to the extreme, rustling and withering, or deathly silent and desolate. The blossoming of the peach blossoms, the blooming of summer lotuses, the falling of autumn leaves, and the withering of plants in the winter, all of it was filled with the traces of time. During the ancient times, there was a saying, "Beauty fades in an instant." At this moment in Xianxia's heart, the changes of the seasons, the rotation between day and night, the growth and withering of all things, and even the passage of time all surged into Xianxia's heart. After that, he started to close his eyes and entered into deep contemplation. He released his mind and allowed it to soar amongst the changes he saw at this instant, and he sensed the shapeless traces of time that filled the surroundings. Where was time? It was everywhere. Life, death, sickness, age, the changes in all things, the repetition of growth and withering, everything contained the traces of time. Thus, there was no need to capture time before Xianxia could sense it, yet his consciousness was unable to reach it, causing him to be unable to comprehend it. However, Xianxia wasn't anxious because comprehending the Tao required comprehension. Comprehension means to comprehend and feel with the heart. To put it in a simpler manner, Tao comprehension was the perception one's heart had towards the Tao. If the heart perceived, then the Tao belonged to one, and this was comprehension. Xianxia Tao heart gradually returned to silence, and his heart was focused and clear. His entire mind and body were immersed within his search for the strands of the energy of time. The heavens, the earth, and everything in the surroundings seemed to have become motionless. At the same time, Xianxia had forgotten about the heavens and the earth, and it was even to the extent that he'd forgotten time and himself. Amidst this strange and profound state, his entire body suddenly fell into a boundless abyss of time. His consciousness, strength, and even spirit, energy, essence, and life, everything was being swiftly washed away. Since the ancient times until now, countless extraordinary figures had obtained nothing from their comprehension of time. Yet their hair turned gray before they transformed into ash. The reason was that time was a supreme force of the heaven Tao. Once one came into contact with it, then if one was unable to comprehend it, one would suffer backlash from the energy of time, so it was extremely dangerous. Xianxia had obtained enlightenment about all of this since the moment he sensed the strands of the trace of time. But there was just no turning back now. A boundless abyss of time lay before him. If he could comprehend it, then he would attain the temporal grand Tao. Yet if he failed, then his lifespan and life was bound to be washed away in the abyss of time. In other words, Xianxia had encountered the threshold of the energy of time at this moment, and his comprehension had just begun. Outside the realm of time, Hua Jiankong stood there silently while his extremely deep and profound eyes seemed to be able to see through everything within the realm of time. At the instant she started to come into contact with the energy of time, his eyes suddenly narrowed before erupting with a divine glow. What shocking comprehension ability! But right after that, Hua Jiankong couldn't help but feel slightly anxious in his heart. Existences at his cultivation realm had long since grasped the energy of time, so he was naturally clearly aware that Xianxia's comprehension of the energy of time had just begun, and this process was definitely extremely dangerous. Because it was the energy of time. In an instant, it could make one change from an exuberant state to a weak state, and then cause one's lifespan to dry up before perishing. Yet it was also able to allow one to instantly return to one's state in the past and lose everything one possessed right now. In other words, time was terrifying because when it extended boundlessly, it was capable of exhausting the lifespan of an immortal, and when it backtracked, it could transform a supreme expert back to an infant state. These two types of terrifying forces were called boundless time and time backtrack. For example, immortal kings were able to instantly and completely exhaust the lifespan of a person with a single thought, and they could also make a person age in reverse to an infant state. However, in this way, the strength and cultivation that person possessed would be ripped away, and it would be like an expert had returned to the starting point of the path towards the grand Tao. This obviously showed exactly how terrifying the energy of time was. However, if two immortal kings were going against each other, then because they had both grasped the energy of time, it would instead be impossible for one to suffer such a miserable outcome. He really is extraordinary. It has only been a few days of time, yet he has already come into contact with the threshold of the energy of time. Right when Hua Jiankong was slightly anxious in his heart, a warm voice suddenly resounded by his ears. He swiftly raised his head and saw that the Dean of Tao Emperor Academy, Meng Xinghe, was suddenly standing by his side. Master! Hua Jiankong cupped his fists and bowed. Meng Xinghe was the same as always. His face was young like the face of a young man, yet his eyes surged with the aura of time and experience. His entire body was like an expanse of a boundless starry sky, and as he stood there casually, it caused others to be unable to help but feel like they had to look up to him. Jiankong, how long do you think she will need to comprehend the energy of time? Meng Xinghe smiled as he asked. Hua Jiankong thought for a moment and said, I can't say for certain. He really didn't dare guess rashly because through the understanding he'd obtained in the recent years, he was entirely unable to judge Xianxia based on convention. This fellow was too extraordinary, and every single thing he did exceeded the expectations of all. Under such circumstances, how could Hua Jiankong dare make a guess? Meng Xinghe smiled, and he seemed to really understand Hua Jiankong's thought as he said, I originally intended to meet him after he fully grasped the Tao Emperor's inheritance. Unfortunately, time isn't with me, and I have no choice but to make some preparations in advance. Hua Jiankong was shocked in his heart. Time isn't with Master? Could it be that some sort of major incident is about to occur in the three dimensions again? However, Meng Xinghe didn't speak any further about this, and he just instructed. Regardless of whether Xianxia is able to advance into the half-step immortal king realm within 100 years of time, you must bring him to come see me. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Hua Jiankong, on the other hand, was stunned on the spot. Within 100 years of time? Why? Could it be that the upheaval of the three dimensions will be erupting ahead of time 100 years from now? When he thought up to here, his eyes couldn't help but narrow. The realm of time. The shapeless energy of time enveloped Xianxia, and his vitality and lifespan seemed to have elapsed by 1,000 years at this moment. His long hair fell to the ground and grew madly without end while his face gradually matured, and it carried the aura of experience. As a saint immortal, his appearance could remain young forever, yet it was utterly impossible to conceal under the rapid loss of lifespan. His hair started to change from black to gray and then to white, his skin started to be branded with wrinkles from age, and his face gradually aged as well. All of this was because the energy of time had flowed throughout his body in that instant, and it washed away his lifespan and vitality at an extremely terrifying speed. Immortals are said to have a lifespan equivalent to the lifespan of the heavens, yet they weren't eternal in the end. There was similarly a limit. Even though Xianxia had cultivated for less than 1,000 years until now, relying on his cultivation at the Saint Immortal realm, it was still sufficient for his lifespan to allow him to exist without any worry for a few 100,000 to over 1,000,000 years of time. However, if his lifespan elapsed at this current speed, then his lifespan would probably be completely exhausted in less than 100 years, and he would wither and die. This was why the energy of time was terrifying. If Xianxia was unable to comprehend its profundity, then his path of cultivation would probably stop here as well. However, Xianxia seemed as if he didn't notice this at all. The energy of time was surging. His white hair fluttered and dropped while his face aged. He was like a statue that was being corroded in the wind. He sat silently in meditation yet was unable to obstruct the corrosion of time. Just like this, an entire 20 years of time had passed. 20 years of time was like a snap of the finger to ordinary immortals. Yet to Xianxia, who was comprehending the energy of time, it caused almost half of his lifespan to be washed away. At this moment, his hair was snow white while his face was still handsome. Yet it was enveloped with a layer of thick aura of age and experience. If someone familiar were to see Xianxia at this moment, they would probably not dare believe the scene before their eyes. However, even if 20 years had passed, Xianxia still seemed as if he didn't notice the changes in him at all, and he comprehended in silence. 20 years have passed. Why hasn't there been any movement from him at all? Outside the realm of time, Hua Jiankong frowned. He recalled the time he comprehended the temporal laws all those years ago, and he'd only exhausted 10 years of time to comprehend a strand of the energy of time, time layer. Even though time layer was only a branch of the supreme temporal grand Tao, it was like the shadow of time that Yun Fuxing possessed. It wasn't the complete temporal grand Tao, yet he was considered to have stepped through the threshold of the temporal grand Tao. Yet Xianxia has actually exhausted 20 years of time and still showed no signs of movement until now. This caused Hua Jiankong to be unable to help but have a slightly bad feeling in his heart. After all, in his understanding, Xianxia was a peerless genius, yet it just so happened that Xianxia seemed to have encountered a problem while comprehending the energy of time and showed no signs of progress. So Hua Jiankong couldn't help but be worried. Could it be that he was a bit too impatient? Hua Jiankong's brows knit together even more tightly. He was clearly aware that Xianxia had just advanced into the Saint Immortal realm a few years ago, and Xianxia had just established his own Saint Tao law before trying to comprehend the energy of time. If it was an ordinary Saint Immortal, that Saint Immortal would probably not try to hastily charge into the half-step Immortal King realm at all. Yet it just so happened then Xianxia had done this. Now, when he thought about it carefully, Hua Jiankong had no choice but to doubt whether Xianxia's choice to hastily comprehend the energy of time was right or wrong. Right at this moment, Hua Jiankong's pupils suddenly constructed. He sensed to his surprise that Xianxia's figure within the realm of time was suddenly enveloped by a shapeless vortex of time. The vortex was shapeless, yet it was filled with the profundities of time. As it revolved, it revealed a gorgeous glow that was translucent like glass. It was the traces of time, and it seemed material. The temporal grand Tao was just like the other two supreme grand Taos of space and life and death. They were divided into countless branches. For example, prediction of time that could deduce the future, or time backtrack that could return something to its original state, or various other branches like the shadow of time, time layer, time freeze, time acceleration, and so on and so forth. Merely based on their names alone, it was obvious that the energy of time definitely deserved its reputation as being one of the three supreme grand Tao laws. Ordinary Saint Immortals only had to comprehend a trace of the profundities of these three supreme grand Tao laws before they could break through and advance into the half-step Immortal King realm. On the other hand, if one desired to advance into the Immortal King realm, then the precondition was fully grasping these three supreme grand Tao laws. In other words, if Xianxia merely intended to advance into the half-step Immortal King realm now, then he just had to grasp a single branch when comprehending the temporal grand Tao. On the other hand, the other two supreme grand Tao laws were the same as well. Within the realm of time, the time vortex was suffused with a translucent glass-like glow as if revolved and fluctuated above Xianxia, and it emanated strands of seemingly material energy of time. At this instant, his entire body seemed to suddenly undergo a transformation. His snow-white hair gradually became jet black. His face that was suffused with an aged and experienced aura started to reveal a young, tender, and fair glow. It was even to the extent that his vitality and lifespan, which had been washed away by more than 50%, started to swiftly recover at an unbelievable speed. In merely the time of a few breaths, Xianxia's appearance returned once more to its original state. His vitality was exuberant. His vital blood was abundant. His vitality surged vigorously, and his vital essence roared like a dragon. Swoosh! Xianxia, that was originally standing still in deathly silence, had finally opened his eyes for the first time in 20 years. His gaze was like a bolt of lightning as it tore through space, and it was filled with an oppressive might. At this moment, his appearance was just like before, yet his bearing was completely different. He seemed like a rock within the ocean of time, and no matter how the powerful and boundless waves of time washed at him, it was unable to move him at all. Time was unable to age his appearance any longer. Time wasn't merciless any longer. Time was like a striation branded on his palm, and it had fused with his body a long time ago. Time was unable to restrict his past, present, and future any longer. Time! Xianxia muttered with a tranquil expression, and the scene within his eyes changed in an illusory manner while a deep sheen of wisdom flowed within them. He seemed to be able to see through the shroud of time and lay eyes on the quintessence of the world. Hiss! Hiss! He suddenly flicked his sleeve. In an instant, a few thousands of strands of sword chi appeared out of thin air, and they shot out from all sorts of different directions at the same time. It seemed like Xianxia had split into a few thousand figures that attacked at the same time from all directions. The shadow of time. Outside the realm of time, Hua Jiankong's eyes sparkled while he was extremely shocked. Once one grasped this branch of the temporal grand Tao, one could control time and form shadows, thus instantaneously overlapping thousands of strands of sword chi that shot out from all directions. This force was formidable because it was completed at the same time and shot out like an overlapped shadow, so it could be considered as unbelievable and astounding. All those years ago, Yun Fuxing relied on this to make a name for himself. Swish! Xianxia stretched out his hand and grabbed. The thousands of strands of sword chi that shot out explosively suddenly sped up in midair, and they were more than 2 times faster than before. It was rather beyond expectations, and it could take others by surprise. Time acceleration. Hua Jiankong was shocked once more in his heart upon witnessing this scene. He finally realized that Xianxia didn't return empty-handed in these 20 years of time, and Xianxia had instead comprehended 2 branches of the energy of time. However, before Hua Jiankong could recover from his shock, he saw Xianxia make a move once more, and Xianxia respectively executed 2 completely new branches of time, time remodeling and will of time. This fellow, with Hua Jiankong's aloof and indifferent disposition, he couldn't help but be moved at this moment, and he gasped. In 20 years of time, he comprehended 4 different branches of the energy of time. There's probably only a few in the entire 3 dimensions that can compare to him, right? Especially the wheel of time. Amongst the numerous branches of the temporal laws, it's a top-rate terrifying existence. Once it's executed, time is like a wheel. No matter how one struggles, one will only be lost in the wheel of time, causing one's life and death to be entirely grasped in his hands. Swish! Meanwhile, a wave of fluctuation arose in the realm of time before Xianxia's figure emerged from within it, and it jolted Hua Jiankong awake from his shock. Senior! Shi cupped his hands and spoke. Hua Jiankong restrained his thoughts and couldn't help but ask in the end. To what extent have you comprehended the temporal grand Tao? Shi thought for a moment and answered truthfully. I can only be considered to have just learned the rudiments of it. If it wasn't for the consumption of my lifespan during comprehension being too quick, then perhaps I would still be able to comprehend even more. As he finished speaking, he couldn't help but feel a wisp of regret in his heart. Just like he'd said, while he was within that strange state of comprehension, he sensed all sorts of energies of time, and they formed a dense mass of more than 1,000 types. Unfortunately, it was precisely because the consumption of his lifespan was too terrifying and his vitality was being washed away at a horrifying rate that he could only comprehend 4 types of branches amongst them in the end, and they were respectively the shadow of time, time remodeling, time acceleration, and wheel of time. Even though his lifespan and vitality had recovered to its initial state now, if he wanted to continue comprehending it, he was unable to return to that strange state of comprehension any longer. Extraordinary. Hua Jiankong gave Shi a rare word of praise when he heard this. This is all thanks to Senior for bringing me into the realm of time. Otherwise, I would definitely be unable to grasp such might in a short period of time. Shi answered with a smile on his face. 20 years have already passed now. Will you continue to comprehend the energy of time? Or will you start comprehending the grand Tao laws of life and death? Asked Hua Jiankong. 20 years. Shi was stunned. He'd never imagined that after a single comprehension of the Tao, 20 years would have passed swiftly when he opened his eyes once more. This caused his heart to tense up. 20 years. What has happened in the outside world during this time? These are the jade slips that little girl from the Shenyuan clan sent here over the years. As if he'd seen through Shi's thoughts, Hua Jiankong flipped his palm before over 10 jade slips appeared on it, and then he passed it over to Shi. Shi was stunned, and he didn't hide anything and immediately started reading through them. The content of the jade slips was very simple. It recorded everything that occurred within the Wuxia clan for the past 20 years in detail. The most striking piece of information amongst all of this was that Wuxia Faming's faction had suffered the forceful and bloody suppression of the current patriarch, Wuxia Feng. Moreover, this suppression was still continuing. According to the information that Axiu received, if nothing unexpected happened, then Wuxia Faming and the others would definitely be overpowered by Wuxia Feng within 100 years of time. Shi was naturally clearly aware that the reason his mother, Wuxia Shui, was able to live safely until now was because she possessed the support of Wuxia Faming and the others in the Wuxia clan. Now, these people had suffered the forceful and bloody suppression of Wuxia Feng, and it caused Shi's heart to be unable to help but feel slightly heavy. He was very clearly aware that the situation his mother, Wuxia Shui, was in had started to turn bad. She became especially vigilant because according to the information provided in the jade slips from Axiu, it was very likely that the external assistance Wuxia Feng relied on was from the sovereign sect. If this was true, then it meant that if Shi wanted to take revenge on the Wuxia clan, he couldn't avoid facing the threat of the sovereign sect. The sovereign sect, Wuxia Feng, they've actually started to work together. Why has this happened? Could it be for the sake of dealing with me? After he finished reading the contents of the jade slips, Shi couldn't help but fall into deep contemplation. He took a deep breath after a long time, and he discarded all the distracting thoughts in his mind and stopped thinking about it. Shi was very clearly aware that he was preparing his plan to take revenge on the Wuxia clan, but at the same time, the Wuxia clan was carrying out intense plans to deal with him and even his mother, Wuxia Shui. Presently, it seemed like an actual conflict hadn't erupted between them yet. However, they were actually making the best use of every second they had to make all sorts of preparations. Senior, I intend to comprehend the energy of life and death right now. In the end, Shi made his decision. The current situation hadn't arrived at a critical state yet, so he intended to strengthen himself as soon as possible. It wasn't just that, he still had to wait for a situation that was beneficial to him to arrive, because it was absolutely impossible for him to attain his wish of taking revenge on the Wuxia clan by himself. This meant that he had to wait for Shiryu, Shangliu Li, Dao Yao, Sun Wuhan, Pang Du, and the other immortal kings to emerge from their closed-door cultivations. He had to wait for the inner court's dean, Qi Zongxing, the ancestor of the Phoenix clan, Zhao Taisai, and the ancestor of the Dragon Dimension, Ao Jihui, to re-emerge into the world as well. At that time, he would be able to rely on the strength of these great figures to launch a swift attack at the Wuxia clan. It's impossible to find any traces of the energy of life and death. However, there's an extremely direct method to allow you to experience its profundities. But this process is slightly cruel, so are you sure you want to start comprehending it right now? Asked Hua Jiankong with an extremely serious expression. What method is that? Xianxia was stunned, and he couldn't help but feel slightly fearful in his heart. Exactly how terrifying is it that even Hua Jiankong feels it's a cruel method? Hua Jiankong answered, life and death. If you don't experience life and death, how would you be able to understand its profundities? You remember your experience in the eternal tomb of kings, right? If you want to comprehend the energy of life and death, then the process is roughly similar to challenging the sword exalt, but it'll be even more bloody and cruel. He wasn't terrifying Xianxia intentionally, and it was instead because the life and death laws were one of the three supreme laws. Moreover, if one wanted to comprehend it, it was even more difficult and dangerous than comprehending the supreme laws of time and space. Xianxia pondered deeply for a long time before he finally said with a smile, Senior, please guide me. Hua Jiankong glanced at Xianxia before he said, Come with me. As soon as he finished speaking, he flicked his sleeve and brought Xianxia along as he instantly vanished. When Xianxia's field of vision recovered, he'd already arrived at a strange and chaotic world. Everywhere that met the eye was covered in mist, and he was unable to sense anything at all. This is the boundless barrier, and there are 18 profound barriers of life and death set up within it. Every single profound barrier is like experiencing the cycle of life and death. If you're able to persist until the end, then perhaps you'll be able to comprehend the profundities of life and death. Hua Jiankong spoke with an extremely serious tone from the side. Remember, life and death changes constantly. You absolutely must not become obsessed within there. Xianxia's heart shook, and then he took a deep breath and nodded. When he saw this, Hua Jiankong stopped hesitating, and he pressed his fingers together before forcefully tearing open a rift in the chaotic world. It was like the bloody mouth of an ancient ferocious beast had suddenly opened wide, and it instantly swallowed Xianxia's entire body. The boundless barrier? What's the boundless barrier? What are the 18 profound barriers of life and death within it? This was the last line of questions that still remained in Xianxia's mind before he was swallowed by the chaotic rift that was torn open. In the next moment, his consciousness instantly became hazy before it fell into an expanse of darkness. When Xianxia woke up, he saw a door of light standing before him, and it obstructed his path. There was a mysterious symbol floating above the door of light, and it was twisted and obscure, causing Xianxia to be unable to distinguish it. Thus, he was naturally unable to see through its profundities. Obviously, this was probably the boundless barrier. According to Xianxia's inference, the first barrier of the 18 profound barriers of life and death was probably behind this door of light. He didn't enter it hastily, and he fell into deep thought instead. All those years ago when he was at the ancient Tao Emperor grounds, he'd once gone against the sword exalt within the eternal tomb of kings, and he'd experienced countless battles of life and death before finally passing through the test. At that time, he'd obtained an extremely deep understanding of life and death. There was great terror at the moment between life and death. As one of the three supreme laws of the three dimensions, the life and death laws weren't new life after rebirth, and it was true life and death. No matter if it was the gods that filled the sky or the living beings that roamed the earth, no one was able to maintain their calm before life and death. For example, the reason immortal kings were able to live for practically an eternity and were unafraid of the assault of time was because they grasped the life and death laws. Then what exactly were the life and death laws? Xianxia didn't know because he hadn't comprehended it. All those years ago when he went against the sword exalt, it merely allowed him to understand that one could be unafraid of death when there was obsession in the heart, and one's heart would be free of restriction when one was unafraid of death. Unfortunately, Being unafraid of death and comprehending the life and death laws were two entirely different things. A force like life and death was bound to not be something that was so easy to comprehend. Let me see exactly what sort of dangers fills these 18 profound barriers of life and death. If it's able to allow me to comprehend the energy of life and death, then no matter how dangerous it is, it's nothing. When his mind calmed down completely, Xianxia made his decision, and he didn't hesitate any longer and walked through the door of light, causing his figure to instantly vanish. Time flowed by swiftly in the blink of an eye. Since Xianxia entered the boundless barrier, there was no further news of him. Or to put it in a more precise manner, since Xianxia entered the realm of time to comprehend the temporal laws 20 years ago, he'd completely vanished from the view of the public. Besides the current dean of Dao Emperor Academy, Meng Xinghe, Hua Jiankong, and a few others, no one knew where Xianxia had gone, and no one heard any news related to Xianxia's whereabouts. This sort of unusualness exceeded the expectations of everyone, and it was even to the extent that it caused a period of discussions and guesses. Some said Xianxia had entered into closed-door cultivation. Some said he'd left the academy a long time ago and was seeking the immortal king realm by himself. It was even to the extent that there was no lack of people that suspected Xianxia's disappearance might be related to the Wuxia clan. Because it was common knowledge that Xianxia and the Wuxia clan were like fire and water after he killed Wuxia Kong and Wuxia Linghong. Now, Xianxia hadn't showed himself for a few tens of years, so others couldn't help but suspect that the Wuxia clan might have harmed Xianxia in secret. Of course, this was merely a suspicion, because if Xianxia was really killed by the Wuxia clan, then Dao Emperor Academy would probably be the first to not let the matter go. The current situation was that Dao Emperor Academy hadn't declared anything to the public with regards to Xianxia's disappearance, and this sort of attitude made many people feel that Xianxia's disappearance didn't have any direct relationship to the Wuxia clan. Besides that, the most anxious people during these past few years of Xianxia's disappearance were none other than his friends and seniors. For example, Zhao Mingli, Ji Shenbing, Zhenlu, Yitang, Ling Qinggu, and many others, and these included the members of the Star Alliance. On the other hand, the most complacent and happy were none other than those that had enmity with Xianxia, but these people didn't include the Wuxia clan. Conversely, the Wuxia clan was extremely vigilant towards Xianxia's disappearance because there was definitely a reason to every strange occurrence. They didn't believe that Xianxia had really vanished for no rhyme or reason. It was even to the extent that the current patriarch of the Wuxia clan, Wuxia Feng, felt that it was extremely likely that Xianxia was accumulating his forces and preparing to take revenge on the Wuxia clan. It was precisely out of this mentality that Wuxia Feng joined forces with Wei Xing to speed up the action he was taking to clean up the resistance within the clan, and in a short period of a few years, 6 elders of the Wuxia clan had vanished forever without a trace. As for some other members of the resistance that had slightly lower statuses, they were either bribed or eliminated, and it was such a huge number of clansmen that it was impossible to count. However, the only thing that could be confirmed was that the forces of Wuxia Faming's faction that supported Wuxia Shui had already suffered an extremely severe blow from Wuxia Feng's ceaseless elimination of their members, and it was even to the extent that they were on the verge of falling apart. But before long, no matter if it was Xianxia's disappearance or the ceaseless and rapid changes in the Wuxia clan, no one paid further attention to it, because at the 67th year of Xianxia's disappearance, the entire immortal dimension was stirred because of a shocking piece of news. The aura of the 5 signs of death had descended to the ancient barbaric continent. The ancient barbaric continent was at the extreme west of the immortal dimension, and it was an extremely ordinary area amongst the 4,900 continents of the immortal dimension. Yet now, along with the arrival of the aura of the 5 signs of death, it instantly caused the ancient barbaric continent to be the center of attention of the entire immortal dimension. The 5 signs of death have arrived, and the 3 dimensions are about to fall into chaos. After they confirmed the truth of this piece of news, numerous great powers of the immortal dimension practically made a single determination, and it was that the upheaval of the 3 dimensions that had been deduced a long time ago was about to sweep through the 3 dimensions. Because the aura of the 5 signs of death was the sign of the arrival of the upheaval. For a time, the entire immortal dimension was filled with panic. All the large powers planned all sorts of operations overnight, and the entire immortal dimension was covered in a bleak and anxious atmosphere. Practically every single person was clearly aware that once the upheaval of the three dimensions arrived, then the gods were like ants, fiend gods were like grass, and no one could survive. What did this mean? Death, chaos, calamity, blood, especially to those immortals that diligently sought after eternal life. The arrival of the upheaval of the three dimensions could absolutely be considered as a calamity that could end the world, and no one dared to strike their chest and guarantee they would be lucky enough to survive this calamity. No one dared to confirm that this calamity wouldn't affect them, and it was precisely because of this that this calamity seemed even more terrifying and shocking. At this moment, even those top large powers were unable to maintain their composure, and they made the best use of their time to plan everything in order to prepare to resist the calamity. Young miss, we can't delay any longer. In Iris' immortal prison, Wuxia Faming came to see Wuxia Shui again, and he spoke while ridden with anxiety. Presently, the foundation of our forces is about to be damaged. If we still don't resist, then we'll lose any chance we had. At this moment, Wuxia Shui's expression had become heavy as well. She'd long since heard of everything Wuxia Feng had done over the recent years, and she naturally understood exactly how disadvantageous the current situation was to her. She took a deep breath and asked, "How many members have we lost in total during the recent years?" "Almost 60%. Wuxia Faming said in a low voice. "However, the only fortunate thing is our most elite forces didn't suffer any losses during this purge." But what?" Wuxia Shui frowned as she asked. "But ancestral Uncle Bei Yong and ancestral Aunt Lang Hua have already stood at Wuxia Feng's side." Wuxia Faming spoke with a bitter voice. "Humph, that was actually within my expectations. All those years ago when my father passed away, I knew the day would come when they would make such a choice. However, I never expected that they would hastily take sides before the outcome of the fight was decided." At this moment, Wuxia Shui calmed down instead, and her eyes flowed with a cold glow. "Aksu, we should seize the moment to make a move. Presently, the aura of the 5 signs of death has descended, and the upheaval of the 3 dimensions is about to sweep through the 3 dimensions. We can choose to make a move at this moment and fight with everything we have, and perhaps we might have a slight chance to turn the situation around." Wuxia Faming spoke in a low voice, and a wisp of a resolute and decisive expression flashed between his brows. "What about Sheer? Is there still no news about him?" Wuxia Shui pondered deeply for a long time. Yet she suddenly changed the topic and asked about Chun Shi. "No." Wuxia Faming shook his head and sighed. "However, I can roughly determine that this little fellow is probably working hard to prepare something. Moreover, he caused Wuxia Feng to feel extremely pressured. Otherwise Wuxia Feng wouldn't have suddenly sped up his operation to purge and suppress us in the past few years." A wisp of an imperceptible glow arose within Wuxia Shui's eyes when she heard this, and then the corners of her mouth curled up slightly before she said with a smile, "Since it's like that, then let's take action." When he heard her agree so readily, Wuxia Faming was stunned instead, and he nodded after quite some time had passed. "All right, then I'll go make preparations." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. "Third uncle." Wuxia Shui suddenly stopped Wuxia Faming. "Actually, even if you didn't tell me, I'd guessed a long time ago that Wuxia Feng has probably colluded with the sovereign sect long ago, and if we rely merely on our current strength, then even if we do resist him, we have practically no chance of winning." "Aksu, you knew since the beginning." Wuxia Faming spoke with a stunned expression, and he'd obviously been taken by surprise, because he'd never told Wuxia Shui about Wuxia Feng colluding with the sovereign sect's Wei Xing, because he was worried that she would feel despair and completely lose any thoughts of resisting. However, this scene before him showed that Wuxia Shui had obviously guessed this a long time ago. There's actually nothing to guess because with Wuxia Feng's overcautious disposition, he would utterly be unable to take such bold and resolute suppressive action. Wuxia Shui's eyes had a calm glow as she spoke slowly. "Then you," said Wuxia Faming. "Don't worry, third uncle. I naturally won't become dispirited just like that. Zhuoqiu Shui smiled with a composed and firm expression. I only hope that all of you'll be able to leave the Zhuoqiu clan safely after this operation. This clan isn't worthy of us giving ourselves to it any longer. Zhuoqiu Feiming's heart jerked, and he was just about to say something when Zhuoqiu Shui spoke before him. Third uncle, there's no need to say anything. If you want to leave a seed for the clan to regrow, then do as I said. Zhuoqiu Feiming's expression changed indeterminately, and he stared at Zhuoqiu Shui for a long time before he gritted his teeth and said, Aksu, then wait for my good news. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure flashed and left, and he seemed to be unwilling to stay here any longer. When Zhuoqiu Shui saw this, not only did she not feel at ease, a wisp of worry arose between her brows instead. She had a very good understanding of Zhuoqiu Feiming's disposition, and she knew that he would probably not do as she said. Could it be that the fate of the clan has already arrived at an irredeemable state? Zhuoqiu Shui muttered while her expression was filled with sorrow and disappointment.